everybody. It's 7 o'clock. Let's call this budget committee of the Silver Falls School District to order. Debbie, no attendance?
Noted.
Okay, great. Before we elect chair and vice chair, we got Andy sent us everyone a copy of the budget committee procedural rules that the Oregon School Board Association prepares for everybody. Does anybody have any questions or changes they'd like to make? I know one thing I'd like, at the school board, we try to get our meetings done by 10 o'clock. So if it becomes, open, if it becomes a long meeting, we try to wrap things up by then. But that's about the only thing I'd like to try to agree on. Anybody else have anything they'd like to offer?
What tab is that under?
Tab? It was an email. It came.
Mr. Chairman, there's no procedural rule document. You might be thinking of the roles and responsibilities document.
It was yeah. Rules. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Craig. Yeah. Yeah. So it's the rules and responsibilities. It's mostly. I guess it's just the guide. Is the way I read it. So yeah. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add or change or talk about?
If I could
Okay.
chime in, Mr. Chairman, in the past, the Budget Committee has traditionally selected the Budget Committee chairperson or vice chairperson from appointed members. And so that would be a procedural rule that could be discussed if the Budget Committee felt compelled to, let's say, have board members be chairperson of the Budget Committee. That would not be out of reason, but would take some kind of consensus by this group.
I always liked it. Does anybody else have any changes?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to mention one thing, that we're having some audience members who can't quite hear us.
Oh, okay.
Especially when Andy was talking, they couldn't quite hear, they just motioned, and
Got it.
I wanted to let you know.
Try to enunciate a little clearer then. Okay, thanks. Okay, is anybody else? Jennifer, do you want to speak, or did you have?
I just, well, the not question, but the topic came up of whether we would continue to decide on appointed members to chair and vice chair versus board members, and I'm fine either way. If the group decided that they wanted to allow board members, I'd be willing to either chair or vice chair. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I guess my hope is that we can have a respectful conversation where all voices are valued, and that we all just have respectful conversation. So that would be my preference in terms of moving forward with leadership for the committee.
That's my preference too, is just to do as we've done and just have the appointed members do it. But we can change it if nobody wants to serve. So. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. So let's move on to the action item. Just to elect. First, we'll start off by electing a chair. When that happens, we'll swap over, and that person will take over and elect the vice chair. So how we'll do it is anybody, we'll take nominations, and if there's more than one nomination, then we'll have a runoff, something like that. So anyway, seeing that, I guess I'm opening the floor to nominations for chairman of the school board, of the budget committee.
So did we decide that it was going to be an appointed member only, or are we flexible?
Well, I assume that I read that as a consensus that we would like to have it as the appointed members do it.
Okay.
That's how I read the room, but if we don't get any nominations for that position, then I think we could switch over.
Okay.
I don't mind. I just like to have a discussion where people can say, I would like to do it, or I don't want to do it, or whatever, just so that people aren't nominating people who aren't necessarily interested.
Right.
Got it. Well, true. I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess if somebody wants to run, make sure you elbow your neighbor and have I guess now's the time.
Right.
So, okay, is that everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's open the floor for nominations for budget committee chairman.
Well, Tom, we'll start it off. I'd like to nominate Aaron Cook. I think he did such a fantastic job last year. And the fact that he's got board experience and he serves on the budget committee for the city of Silverton, I think he's a fantastic choice to meet us this time around as well.
Okay. Got a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, anybody else? Any other nominations? Okay, well, seeing none, I guess it makes it easy. All in favor of Aaron being the...
Did we want to ask him if he wanted to do it?
Oh, did you want to run? You're gonna do
You might
it,
want to
yeah.
ask if he wants to do it. I think we may
I'm
not
not gonna
care
ask
if
you.
he wanted to ask. If he wanted it.
I assumed you would have spoke up.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, all in favor of Aaron Cook being chairman of the budget committee, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, motion carries. Take it away, Aaron.
All right, our next item up for discussion would be electing a vice chair for the budget committee. I'll open the floor for nominations for that position.
I'd like to nominate Jacob Clem.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any other nominations for that spot? Or, sorry, yeah. Are you willing to do that, Jacob?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks. Any other nominations that we'd like to have for vice chair? All right, well, let's take it to a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Jacob is vice chair. All right, next item on our agenda here is the budget message from Andy. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Andy, and let you deliver the message for this evening. Kick things off.
Couple of items before I begin. First of all, I'd like to welcome Peter as a new budget committee member, appointed last summer. So welcome, Peter. Good to see you. Thank you for your volunteerism. Thank you, all of you, for your volunteerism and willing to serve on the budget committee. This is a critical role in this school district and really does help some direction specifically related to financial matters in this district. So thank you all very much. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to show a few slides during my budget message. Each one of you, however, have the PowerPoint in your packet. It's under the supplement tab in the back. So the four of you, let's say Tim or Curry, you know, if you want to see the PowerPoint, you surely look behind you, but it's also in paper copy in your packet. And each one of you has also received the budget message as part of your packet in the supplement tonight. So let me know if you can't find any of those documents. Certainly in there though. Okay. So I present to you the 2019-20 Silver Falls School District proposed budget. First, I want to point out some notable procedural changes this year. We've taken very seriously the budget committee feedback and suggestions shared last year. They've been addressed. I especially appreciate Steve Nielsen and his staff for their efforts. I think you will appreciate these changes as well. Here's a brief summary. This budget meeting is occurring nearly 2 weeks earlier than in 2018. It's a request of this group. While this is a helpful change, I also believe it's the earliest we can be fully prepared with a proposed budget and supporting information for review by the budget committee. The proposed budget and budget message is presented a full month earlier than last year. You received that at your second meeting last year. The budgeting process is better defined and more linear. As examples, we're beginning the budgeting process with the budget message. This is a new procedural step. And the district program worksheets are going to be shared tonight too, so you have a thorough understanding of how funding is determined before hearing from the school principals. The school district strategic plan has a more notable presence in this process. Each principal will discuss their efforts for stakeholder input when creating their budget worksheets. So I'm going to begin with some sobering news. Once again, we are in the all too common position of crafting a budget based upon funding uncertainty and too many assumptions. While there are some indicators of funding optimism at the state legislature, we may not know with certainty for weeks. For this budget proposal, we're relying upon the Legislative Ways and Means Committee co-chair's budget level for K-12 education of $8.87 billion, with an expected appropriation of 49% during year 1 and 51% during year 2. Efforts toward a statewide education investment budget of $2 billion may obtain legislative approval prior to the end of this session, but it's uncertain if voter approval will be realized. As of today, April 11th, there are no clear indicators of resolution for K-12 funding level higher than the co-chair's proposal. While there's plenty of discussion, there just has not been any resolution. And some of you may have tuned into the Joint Committee on Student Success hearing it's occurring right now, actually, as we speak, and I think there's been some great testimony there. But I'm not certain that they'll have any referral to the legislative floor by tonight, and I'm not certain when that's going to happen. So I share this with you because Silver Falls School District is funded by approximately 75% from the state school fund, which is generated through state income tax revenue. The remainder is provided by local property tax revenue, approximately 20%, and from federal funds and grants, about 5%. Any change to the state funding level, either positive or negative, would have a direct effect on our school district. And Steve, I know, will talk a little bit more about that when he shares his comments. So we're fortunate in this proposal, to maintain existing programs and at the current service level. However, it also requires planned use of reserves to 5% of total general fund budgeted resources, a budgeting goal of the Silver Falls School Board. The last fiscal year our school district relied upon reserves to meet our needs was in 2012-13. Additionally, one principal has suggested the freezing of some remaining purchases between now and the end of the current year in an attempt to increase the school carryover reserves. It's been a few years since this strategy has been used and is another indicator of our uncertainty. So here are the board approved budgeting goals. Are on your document, but I also have them on the screen. Maintain 2018-19 class size averages. I want to note that these are averages. Kindergarten, 20 students. Grades 1 through 8, 25 students. Grades 9 through 12, 27 students. I think it's real important to note, too, that in reflection upon the same goal during the current school year, fiscal year, we've been able to maintain those averages. In fact, we came in under those averages. Second board goal is school and program allocations, which maintain current levels of staffing. The third being funding for state mandated physical education requirements for K through 5 students. The fourth, funding for management services, long-range facility planning, consultant and committee efforts, attendance boundary review consultant and committee efforts. Number 5, budgeted fund balance minimum 5% of general fund revenue. Again, we're dipping into that. Last year, the goal was 6%. And number 6, apply the district's strategic visioning plan. Now for some helpful optimism. This is the final year of our 5-year strategic plan. We're making significant progress toward board approval of a new plan by the end of the school year. This budget reflects our strategic plan and priorities identified by more than 600 people in our diverse communities during a dozen focus groups, 3 public forums, and electronic engagements in the fall. What we heard is the most common priorities were improved facilities, mental health and counseling supports, our social emotional learning efforts, maintaining the uniqueness and autonomy of our individual schools, continued support for our athletic programs, extracurricular activities, fine arts, and CTE programs. Many also shared the importance of stable and adequate school funding, school safety, improved student attendance, and advocacy for equity. This budget demonstrates progress towards educational equity for all of our students. You will see additional resources proposed in the areas of special education, facilities and maintenance, and required curriculum and instructional improvements. As past budget committee members have experienced, we've made recent and significant gains to equitable access in the areas of technology, English language services, curriculum and instructional tools, facilities, nursing services, counseling services, mental health support, student intervention, and others to reduce barriers to student access and to support the individual needs of our students. While we have significant work yet to do, there's no question about that, the efforts of our educators and the support of our communities have resulted in the highest performing measures that this district has ever realized, including our 2018 graduation rate of 91% and a completion rate of 94%. That's our 5-year completion rate. Got a couple of slides in your packet which demonstrates those 2 data points. We have a few known costs, such as the midterm collective bargaining agreement with our classified union, OSEA Chapter 148. We begin bargaining with the licensed union later this month for a new collective bargaining agreement. We also know that our current PERS rates are increasing approximately 4% of payroll district-wide next year, which equates to an additional $750,000 annually, or to our annual payroll costs. That's about 14% of total PERS costs for the district. Steve will discuss these as well. We continue to experience modest and predictable annual enrollment increases, averaging about 1%. You also have a slide in there as well. This is the same slide, board members, that I shared with you recently when we discussed the K-5 proposal to you. 2 recent district work groups have taken deep dives into our current and projected district-wide enrollment figures. These groups delivered recommendations for the board so we can be fully prepared to support the expected enrollment growth. This data point is significant as flat or increasing enrollment is critical to sustain funding in Oregon schools. I'm aware of school districts experiencing declining enrollment right now, which has resulted in inevitable funding reductions for those communities. I appreciate the visionary influence of our school board by protecting, as possible, our budgeted fund balance. Use of reserves in this budget is reflective of that vision, especially as this practice directly protects students from experiencing the known and unknown variables affecting their education. In other words, if there are reductions or use of reserves or some kind of impact on the school district, the last thing that I want to do, and that you, I'm certain, want to do, is to have kids experience that. And this budget keeps it away from kids. These are things like the PERS rate increases, unfunded mandates, and the likelihood of inadequate state school funding in the future due to shifts in Oregon's economy. This board vision also reflects the reality of aging facilities. While the average age of our schools dropped from 70 years to 66 years following the discontinued use of Eugene Field School, our facilities continue to require essential maintenance investments for use into the future. Additionally, the operation of each of our schools continues to be a strong priority for our communities. We've been fortunate to invest $6 million into multiple schools over the past 4 years following our awarding of competitive state seismic grants. We are awaiting news within the next 2 weeks to learn that the eligibility for an additional $5 million to seismically upgrade the classroom wings at Silverton Middle School. Finally, the stability of Oregon's economy indicates steady state school funding levels for the immediate future. However, since school funding is directly correlated to Oregon's economy, any economic decline in the future will result in a similar decline in school funding. The reality is we will be back in an unpredictable cycle of school funding, which makes it challenging to support the vision of Silver Falls School District. From my perspective, our vision can be realized with sustainable funding levels defined in the Oregon Quality Education Model. And I know a couple of board members have discussed that being a priority as well. While we continue to grow as a high-performing school district in our state, the budget does not allow us to meet the thriving standards as defined in the QEM. It's my hope that the Oregon legislature will truly secure a solution to the recurring school funding reality. We are fortunate to live and work in a stable school district, as evidenced by nearly 500 first-rate educators who spend much, if not their entire career, in this district. Our teacher retention rate continues to be one of the highest in the area. I'm pleased that this district employs the finest educators around who take seriously their responsibility of teaching to the individual needs of students. Our communities sustain a high level of support for education and unwavering volunteer commitment. Many of these values are mirrored in our strategic plan, which defines who we are, and it charts our direction as we move forward as a unified district. Our unique model of schools, school choice, and local-based decisions are important priorities in Silver Falls School District. These priorities continue to be evident in public input and engagement. Approximately 6% of our annual total enrollment comes from other school districts, which helps support our priorities. It's my hope that the health of Oregon's economy will continue and that members of the public will influence lawmakers in the future to reach bipartisan support for a sufficient investment in Oregon schools. If sustained and predictable funding is realized, Silver Falls School District educators can meet the investment needs of each student and provide for a 100% graduation rate. We know it's possible, we know it's real. I believe this budget will adequately support their ability to do so. I present it to you and I recommend its approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll address any questions for you.
Thanks, Andy. Does anybody have any questions regarding what Steve just shared?
I've got a question.
So this is one of those odd years in the biennium when we go into this with a lot of assumptions
Right.
on what the funding will be. So if the ultimate funding package from the state is radically different than what we had anticipated here, is that just resolved through a supplemental budget process that goes to the board, or how does that get resolved?
It may be best for Steve to get into the weeds a little bit more on that, but a supplemental budget is a legal action that the governing board does have to take. It generally occurs after the budget has been adopted by the board. So I anticipate that before the budget is adopted by the board, we'll have some secure funding levels. You know, either the legislature will take action, or we'll have a pretty good indication. So I think we'll be able to make those adjustments prior to the adoption by the board.
What would that process look like if we had to make adjustments?
Before it's adopted,
Before
Jonathan?
we adopt it?
Oh, that.
Would we reconvene this
It
group?
would be this group. Well, once this group approves the budget, Jonathan, then it's handed off. Their job is done, the budget committee's role is done. It's handed off to the board. So I'd say if something happens within the next 3 weeks before this budget committee meets again, then we'll bring back some updated figures for the budget committee. If the budget committee approves it, and then figures change between the time of approval and the board adoption, then it would be in front of the
Charles?
Andy, on the approved budgeting goals, you say that you want to apply the district strategic visioning plan.
The school board approves the vision, Charles, and the school board.
I hear that they approve it, but I read that in your presentation. Who prepares it?
That's about a year-long process by community members, by a leadership team comprised of administrators, teachers, classified staff members, community members, who make recommendations to the board based upon a series of meetings that we take the public input and apply it into draft mission, vision, core values for the school district. It's all presented to the board. And then-
Was I part of that process when I participated in the visioning interviews?
If you were part of the focus groups, you were. That was all part of that process.
That's what you're referring to. Those are where the values come from?
Yes, yes. I mean, it has to be sorted through a team, a committee that takes that information from 600 plus people, sorts it out, puts it into what they believe to be the values that the public has shared, and then that's presented to the board.
So the values of that process are reflected in this budget?
Correct.
Except for that we're working under
The current strategic.
yeah, so this year's process will take effect for next year's budget.
I'm a little confused by the way you presented it. It says this is the final year of the 5-year strategic plan,
Correct.
which involves the last grouping of values. But then it goes on to say this budget reflects our strategic plan.
This one.
Can I
This-
just-
this
Yes, you have a
plan-
copy in your notebook, Charles.
Yeah,
of that.
I have that, but I'm asking, does it reflect the values as presented in those focus groups? Or does it reflect, it says the budget reflects our strategic plan, the plan that's
Yes, I mean, so,
prepared?
a fair question. Yes, by definition, the budget reflects the goals of the current strategic plan, which was captured when we initiated the process 5 years ago.
So it's a 5-year-old set of values being applied here.
The strategic plan is reviewed by the board every year and updated as the board feels appropriate.
Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to understand.
You bet.
Yeah, so I'll add some of that to that, Andy, Dale, that Charles, each one of us has this in the front of our book. That's kind of the guiding principles, the guiding, Magna Carta, so to speak, of how we apply and what we do here in the district. You participated in the citizen focus groups. Some of us here tonight, myself, Leslie, who's here in the audience, were citizen members of the current strategic visioning plan committee, which is adopting the new one for the next 4 years, so which will kick in after this one expires here in 2019. So you're right, we're using the current enacted strategic vision plan years 2014 through 2019. What you participated in is for the upcoming revised strategic visioning plan, which is currently being developed right now. Does that help?
It helps, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
So I want to bring this up now because you made a note about it in the first budgeting goal, but you said, noted that the enrollment were just averages. And it would be nice.
Class size.
In class sizes, the average. It'd be nice if we could have a little more descriptive statistic. Maybe have a median, so we can kind of see where that, what the shape of that average looks like. If that information could be added, if we're available, it'd be nice to kind of get it.
Yeah, and I'll rely upon the budget committee if that's something the budget committee would like. Again, this is a board goal, so we're providing the information specific for a board-approved goal. And if the budget committee would like additional information to the board goal, Peter, I'm happy to do that, but I think that's really up to the majority of the budget committee if you want that information, or Peter, we can certainly.
I just brought it up because you mentioned and noted it was just an average, and it sounded like that was,
Sure.
There was some concern, or I don't know why you'd say note, but it is a concern a little bit to me to just use an average. It's a great number. I mean, it's an easy, straightforward, but it's also nice to attach kind of the side rails on that number to understand, are we skewed left or right of that average far, or it kind of gives you the shape of the distribution curve. So,
Peter, if I'm hearing you correctly, you'd like to see kind of like what our average is now currently, and what the low end and maybe the high end would be for each of the grade ranges. Is that
just,
fair?
yeah, I mean, if you're calculating the average, just another basic descriptive,
Yeah.
a couple of having an average, the median, so the middle,
Yep.
I mean, that really kind of tells you where the
Yep.
skew is. And then to have you can throw a max and a min in there, that doesn't necessarily give you too much, but
Sure.
that median just is a very simple thing to add in there, and it really gives you a picture of the shape of the curve. If it's right on, dead center, that gives you a kind of normal distribution kind of picture, usually, and having that max and min would be great. But it just adds, that's really what I'm looking for, just to have a little better description of where that number is landing.
You have some of that, Andy, in the draft goals that went before the board. There were some numbers I remember seeing. There was the draft goals that went to the board adopted and approved. Maybe some of the board members can.
There was some results from the current year.
Yeah.
That was that data, but
Okay.
it was also based on averages.
Okay. Maybe that's something for by the next meeting, or.
We can put that together.
Or we can put
Sure.
that together, or if maybe even dispersing by email as a follow-up to the budget committee. Does that sound
Yeah,
fair?
I mean, if I could get, I think access for everything, it'd be nice if we could just get the numbers and I can run it, if it's easy, or I can.
Sure, maximum, minimum, and median number, we can
Median.
do that.
Okay.
So do we need to make sure that all the committee members agree for that request?
Well, that's a procedural action,
Yeah.
yeah, I admittedly, if the majority of the board is in favor of that, that's generally something that we ask, rather than one person asking for information. So I don't see anybody saying no, but surely it'd be worth asking if folks disagree with that.
Yeah, I could put it out to vote if people would like that.
There's just consensus.
Just a
Yeah, I
consensus?
don't think we need to do an actual vote. I think it's just a consensus because it's not an action item on the
Okay.
agenda, so.
Is
we can
everybody
just do a consensus.
aligned with that request for additional data? Any opposition to that? I would assume not. Okay, thanks.
I have a question. And maybe this is gonna be covered later, maybe with Steve, but I have a question about the remaining purchases being frozen. And if that's a strategy that is being considered, because it's in here, so I was just curious if that is that, do you have a list of what would be frozen?
No, and it's not a directed action. It's a tool that principals have the authority to do within their schools if they believe that it's in their best interest to preserve some reserves, because they're able to reserve some reserves for the following year. So at least one principal has shared the interest of
Okay,
doing
so
that,
it
but
would
that
still
decision
be,
has not been made.
it would still be site-based principal to principal?
Correct.
That
Yeah,
was my
that's,
question.
yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one quick one, I think. Can you give us a refresh on what the actual PE requirements are for K-5? I know there's been discussion about things being delayed. I just don't remember what the details are for this.
Yeah, and I may
budget.
have to lean on Jennifer a little bit, but we're in year one phase in, I believe, at the K-5 level for up to, was it 150 minutes a week, Jennifer?
Yeah.
Of required physical education instruction, and then that grows through, I believe, the 23 or 24 school year, when all grades through the 8th grade are required to have a minimum number of required PE minutes per week.
Okay, so for this budgeting purpose, it's 150 is what you were saying?
150 for K-5 students.
We're at one.
So 125?
Now, yeah.
Okay.
The complete phase-in will be 150. So 30 minutes every day is the.
We're fortunate, Jonathan, that that's allowed to be instructed by self-contained content teachers. The original bill required that it be physical education endorsed teachers. The legislature followed up with a rule change on that, saying that that would be a very difficult thing.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Wade to share from the budget message? Okay, great.
Great. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just going to do a quick review here of, and I think some of the discussion we've already had is really germane to this next point, is reviewing our duties and our responsibilities of the budget committee. And I know we already had a little touch on it, and some of the documentation has already been sent out to us in advance. So thank you, Andy, for sending that out already to all of us in our information packets. But a couple of pieces that I as we were talking, wanted to point out, as Charles brought up the strategic visioning plan, I think we have some two key pieces of information that we need to consider as budget committee members as kind of our guiding lights and guiding principles for this budget. Number one is the strategic visioning plan, which we all have a copy of in the front of our packet. That is clear on what our goals are, where we are as a district, what we value as a district. And also number two is the budgeting goals that Andy just shared. Again, those were already adopted by our school board. Those are what they have tasked us as a committee, and they are included here, to adopt this budget and to ratify and look at this budget with these goals in mind. So I think as we go through all the budgets, we talk to all the administrators, we listen to our principals, and they present our budgets to us. I think we can all agree our number one task is to take those two pieces of information and use those as our litmus test. If the budgets that we get presented by our administrators and by our principals are meet up to the goals set forth by the strategic visioning plan and by our board goals, it's our job to say that looks good and to approve it. Now, again, that doesn't mean we don't ask a lot of questions and like we've done in the past, that's what we need to do. But I think as we come back to everything, our litmus test for the budgets are these two pieces of documents that I think we can always keep front and center during our meetings. Any thoughts, questions?
Aaron, I had something to add.
Yeah.
I did ask where that sheet was, the roles and responsibilities from OSBA. It is in the supplements section behind Andy's budget message and presentation slides. And I just wanted to emphasize the last paragraph about communicating with our community. I think that each of us has our own group of people that know us and know that we are on the budget committee, and I think it's great that they know that, so they can ask us questions, and if we ask good questions, we can understand it and explain the budget, and that just creates a lot of goodwill within our community and unifies everyone. So I just want to encourage people to ask good questions so that they can understand, we can build a common understanding of the budget. I hope that's reasonable.
Very reasonable. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I also wanted to add something. Asking for clarification on lots of information. There's a lot of information here that a lot of our public might not understand, or want to know in more detail or have more clarity on. And so I would encourage to ask for clarity. I would encourage to ask questions, especially of Steve, because he's very good at explaining specific details about the budget. And that helps, in conjunction with what Jennifer said, to our public, so they can understand the process and the numbers. And that way we're all in the same conversation, in the same loop. So I'd like to encourage questions and clarity on any portion of the budget cycle. So thank you.
Thanks. That's a great point. I think also too that I wanted to bring up an idea as part of our roles and responsibilities, that our job is to really hone in on the budgets and review the line items and review the presentations and again apply our budget goals and our strategic visioning plan as part of the approval process. I think if we come to anything that comes during the meeting that might infringe outside of our roles and responsibilities, that goes to more board roles and responsibilities, I think maybe we can suggest an idea of maybe a parking lot for ideas. That if something comes up that might be kind of out of our scope, that we suggest that is further actions taken or brought to the board level, and not by this committee, but by the board itself. So just wanted to throw that out there, just again, for help us to be expeditious, to go through a lot of the information that we're going to be presented. But again, I think we have specific roles and responsibilities, and if it goes outside that, then the board needs to be the ones to really take action on those. So I want to throw that out there. I mean, does everybody sound good and aligned with that idea as well? Okay, cool. All right, excellent. All right, I think we're really clear on our responsibilities here. So next, I'll ask Steve Nielsen to come up to present our proposed district budget. Steve, before you get started, I'm gonna come back to the one question that Jacob asked, just to make sure that you got clarity, Jacob, on that. I know that we deferred kind of to Steve.
Yeah, I mean, Andy touched on it. Yeah, I mean, I think I understand it. I think because, I mean, but I do this every day.
Yeah.
So I mean, but for anybody else that doesn't do this every day, you know, maybe some additional info would be.
Yeah.
Are we talking about if there's changes?
Yeah, if there's a radical change to what the budget ends up being from, you know, what we're seeing here today.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, good evening. Thank you very much. What Andy said is absolutely correct. It really depends the timing of any changes that occur at what stage in the budget process. And I guess the nice thing about gathering on April 11th and not having another meeting until the 2nd is we have time for an additional meeting or meetings if we need them, but we also have time for to keep a close eye on what's happening at the Capitol and make said adjustments. So if there was something that happened between you know, now and the next meeting, or if we had another meeting before the budget went from proposed to approved, we could the committee could recommend changes based on additional revenue, for example, and where are we going to spend that money. And therefore, the approved budget would then look different than what the proposed budget is. If there was something that happened after the budget committee approves the budget, but before adoption, then the same thing could happen. So essentially, potentially, the proposed, approved, and adopted could all be different. That's why there's 3 separate columns, because they're all can be different steps in the process. Last year, it did not change from proposed to adopted, but as Jacob said, in our odd-numbered years, with the legislature in action, with a bargaining agreement to still yet to take place with it certified, there's things that can happen, and certainly that's why, you know, the process is set up the way it is. So.
I have a quick question on that. Has there ever been a time that you know of that there's been changes after an adoption?
It's not uncommon for districts to have a supplemental budget for whatever reason. There's a couple different things that can happen. Anytime a district receives some unanticipated revenue, whether it be something that's going through the general fund or through a special revenue fund, as long as it's not over a certain percentage, 10% I believe, we can bring a resolution to the board to say, here's additional revenue, and this is how we propose to spend it. But if it's a change above 10%, then a supplemental budget is required, and that's kind of a formal process, but that just goes through the board, obviously, because that's happened after the adoption of the budget.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can people hear me out there? Yeah? Okay, good. All right.
Thanks for the clarity.
Yeah, that's good clarity for our audience that's here as well. So,
Sure.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
So I'm going to continue on the journey. We have a few more slides for the PowerPoint here, and as I go through that and beyond, I'm also going to refer to some supplemental information, which starts the page after the roles and responsibilities in the back, but I'll also be referring to a couple of other tabs as well as we go through it, and I'll pause a couple of times for questions, and if there's a burning question, please feel free to stop me, but I'll definitely have time at the end as well for that. So again, this is in your PowerPoint that you have in front of you, also on the screen. Basically, the budget is based on a stable but really a slightly growing enrollment. The slide that Andy had up shows that, over that 10-year period, we've grown at about an average of 1%. So this budget is taking that same trend into account. We feel safe with that because of the ODE's hold harmless rule of funding at the current year or the year prior, whichever is higher. So feel comfortable with that. And that's one of the big three items in terms of adequate funding for a school district is enrollment. So that's a big deal. There's a lot of enrollments that are in a declining environment. As Andy mentioned in his budget message, the state school fund revenue in the proposed budget is based on the current legislative Ways and Means co-chair's budget recommendation of $8.87 billion, which, as we've discussed, is $100 million lower than the governor's base recommended budget. For the Silver Falls School District, that means $300,000 less revenue for the general fund in 2019-20, and it would mean a little more than that, probably about $320,000 in 2020-21, and that's because they're funding it the 49% in 2019-20 and 51% in 2020-21. So we know there's a lot more on the table, and that's what's going on at the Capitol as we speak, the Joint Committee on Student Success. But just if we were able to get the extra $100 million back to the governor's recommended budget, would mean over $600,000 for us over the biennial period, which that's a big deal. So we're just going to continue to keep a close eye on it. We prefer to budget on conservatively, and we feel like this is kind of the worst case scenario in terms of the state budget. With that, the general fund current resources are up $3.1 million, or 8%, over 2018-19, and state school fund total formula revenue, that's adding the state school fund and all the local revenue like property taxes, is up $1.8 million. So 1.8 of the $3.1 million increase from current resources from total formula revenue. Another, obviously, since 80+% of our costs moving to the expenditure side is tied up in employee costs, which is not uncommon for a service organization. I wanted to refresh everyone where we're at with our collective bargaining agreements. Currently, we're in year 2 of 3 with the Classified Association. So we have one more year left, so we know what those costs are. The Teachers Association, we are currently in the final year of a 2-year agreement, and we begin bargaining later this month with that group. And the non-rep admin employees are not yet determined, but for all groups, we have budgeted for step increases, which is common, as well as some COLA and some insurance. So again, we're trying to be conservative on that. I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint really quick. Before I move past revenue, I wanted to I had a few things specific to it's not going to show up very big on the screen, sorry. However, it's in your supplement section. So the first page, after the guidelines, we have our current state school fund estimate from ODE, which is what our budgeted revenue is based on. This is the co-shares version. And we went through this as a review, I think 2 board meetings ago, in terms of kind of reading through this page, but please feel free to study that. The second page here is always page 1 of the estimate, and then they have one for every district. And it's always very interesting to look at this because you can kind of reconcile how the state school fund gets appropriated out. So you can see over on the top right there, the 8.871 billion. You can see how it's separated at the 49.51% between the 2 years. And then you can see all of the carve-outs in red as you go down the way there. So some of that comes back around to us, like high-cost disability dollars, for example. You can see how it gets distributed between school districts and ESDs. Again, some of that comes back to us through contracted services with the ESD. So feel free to take a look at that. I've thrown in here behind that our current general fund financial statement through March 31st, which we just discussed Monday at the board meeting. So it shows you exactly where we're at for the current fiscal year. And then the 4th and 5th pages are supplemental ODE required revenue and expense worksheets. This is just for the general fund, but it was part of our audit report, but I felt like it was good to bring this back because it really shows, for the folks that really want to get into what every revenue source code is, and actually for the revenue it's for all funds, but there's a separate page for every expense, a separate page for each fund for expenses. So I just threw the general fund in. But these are 17, 18 actual numbers as reconciled with our audit report. So this gives you a good idea of how below the fund and the fund level, how the function, the different functions break out and the different objects. And just as a reminder, instructional expenditures are anything that start with a 1, and support services are anything that start with a 2. Instructional expenditures are things that are providing direct instruction or support for kids in the classroom, and anything that begins with the 2 is a support service, which are services that help the people that are instructing the kids with services, but those also include things like counseling and speech and language pathology and health services. Those are things in the 2000 series, as well as student transportation, as well as, of course, business and HR and office of the principal and those types of things. So just a reminder on that. And again, as far as the objects that go from left to right, anything that begins with a 1 is a wage or a salary. Anything that begins with a 2 is a benefit, taxes, PERS, insurance. So objects 100 and 200 added together is our total employee cost. Objects 300 are purchase services, like our bus contract, for example, or nursing services through the hospital. Objects 400 are supplies and materials. 500 is capital outlay. 600 are other objects like dues and fees, but also our insurance premiums. So I know I got a little down into the weeds there, but I just thought the proposed budget document is rolled up at a higher level, and I really wanted this to be in your notebook for you to study at any time because I do find it to be very helpful. Okay, so we'll get back to a couple more slides here. So the biggest factor expense-wise with the with the budget this year, proposed budget, and we've talked about it quite a bit since the fall and even last year and the year before that, but Andy mentioned in his budget message, but the PERS rate increase. So you can see that PERS costs in our budget will be in just the general fund, $1.1 million more in 2019-20 than 2018-19. Now, that's not all attributed to the rate increase, but much of it is. So $750,000 increase is attributed to the PERS rate increase, which is increasing by about 4% of payroll. If you go back to your supplement section, and I don't think I have this one for the screen, there's a sheet here that shows historical PERS rates. It's actually just for the last 2 biennium, and we're at the very bottom of the page there, so you can see what our rates are, what we charge payroll. So it's jumping from 17.08 to 21.21% of payroll for Tier 1 and Tier 2 members, and 11.75 to 15.76% for OpCert members. Right now, we have about 50% of our employees in Tier 1, Tier 2, and 50% in OpCert. Might actually slightly be a touch more in OpCert now, and it continues in that direction. So when I budget this these rate factors, I'm budgeting, for example, for 1920 and 2021, right in the middle of the OpCert and the Tier 1, Tier 2 rates, because that's about where we're at. But we also can't forget about the fact that we cover the employee PERS contribution, PERS pickup. That's 6% of payroll, and then 8% of payroll is charged to service our PERS UAL bond, our debt service for PERS. So, you know, when you add roughly 18% plus an additional 14, our PERS costs are about 32% of payroll for PERS eligible members, which are most folks. Now, we do have people that start new, that are new into PERS and have a 6-month waiting period and those types of things. But so some more stats on that. So it's so budgeted PERS costs in the 1920 budget is $6.3 million, which equates to 14.2% of our planned total general fund expenditures this year, and in 17-18 it was about 13%. So the impact is large. So
Steve, is it really confused? There's a lot of numbers in there, you know, and a lot of this is negotiated with unions. You know, we know what we're going to match, but can you pull out that how much is just attributed to this PERS shortfall we keep hearing about? Is that something? Does that question make sense to you?
yeah.
What percent? What numbers?
Well, there's quite a bit rolled up in the rate that has to do with the shortfall.
So
I mean,
how much
in terms of you know, what we're contributing to PERS obviously is not just for the current workforce.
Correct. But is it able to put just what's the number just for the shortfall? Is that something that's that I missed over?
No, I'd have to get back to you on trying to come up with something like
Okay.
that. We do get an actuarial report. The PERS hires an actuary each year, and I haven't looked at it for a while, but that's something that I could follow up on for the next meeting.
Yeah, I've just been reading a lot about it, and it's something that...
But if you look, it's interesting. We just, we're fortunate to be on the same page as 3 lines above. You can see just school districts. So we have our own line item like all these other school districts because we bonded to pay pay PERS now and try to, you know, the district hedged back in 2003, 2004, that, you know, interest of 5% on the bond, that PERS would make more than that, and it has. So you can see districts that bonded in 2003 or 2004 have come out ahead. I think that there was an offering that went out in 2007 or 8, right when the recession started, and those districts aren't on the right side of it. But you can see that the school district rates for districts that did not bond are 32% for tier 1 and 2 and 26.58% for observe. So if you were to take, you throw the 6% out of it, because that is a negotiated item with the union. But if you add our 8% that we're paying on the bond, we would be at 29.21 and 23.76 respectively, which beat those two rates.
Yeah, no, we've definitely made some proper decisions to help curb it.
Absolutely.
But I'm just trying to get my hands
Sure.
around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the articles I read, the forecasts are just gonna, if they're correct, it looks like it might be worse.
Yeah.
So, Steve, what I'm gathering here is that lower numbers are better. But, so, I mean, what is Lincoln County School District doing to be paying virtually nothing?
There were a number of districts in one particular offering, because there was a group of offerings, especially around 2003, 2004. They actually borrowed more than they needed.
Sure.
So they have a little bit of a surplus in there, and every situation is completely different. Yeah, there are a few districts that are very, but I can't, I mean, that was a situation that I understood for a lot of those districts that ended up borrowing way more than they needed to, so of course they're paying interest on the other side.
Okay.
It's a set-aside account, basically.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead,
Quick
John.
question, it's just based on the 3 slides we just saw.
Yeah.
There was a bullet 2 slides back, it said general fund current resources up 3.1 million, 8%. And then it says SSF totals, can you explained it once, but it didn't click for me. SSF total formula revenue up 1.8, does that mean total revenue sources are up 4.9? It says 4.9%, but then it also adds up to 4.9 million, so I'm not sure if that's a typo or if.
Yeah, well, we can reconcile that because that's a great segue
Okay.
to the next thing that, well, let me just make sure I covered the supplements. Yeah, I did. So let's look at it. I was going to take you to the revenue tab. And I could have botched that line item in the presentation. Let's look at it here. So the revenue tab, and this also speaks, Jonathan, to one thing that you had talked about a few months ago about kind of how things kind of get allocated out, you know, and, you know, because you were talking about, you know, this would be the first time you've gone through this. I think this sheet really speaks to that, but it's the, this thing won't get bigger. I'm sorry, I thought this would be a little bigger on the screen. So the revenue at the top of this page here, again, this is just for the general fund. But if you add,
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
you can slide this over,
And close
and then you'll grow this.
yeah, I thought I did see an X there to,
How does it look arrow to the right?
That little arrow, that's a
Yeah.
really unintuitive little location.
oh, here we go. There we go. Thank you. I just thought the window would go a little bit. Anyway, so the first 3 line items are the total formula revenue, which you can see in parentheses there, equates to $39,745,860, which is what is referred to as the total formula revenue. So local revenue, property taxes, timber, common school fund, county school fund, the transportation grant, and the state school fund general purpose grant. Add all those 3 together, that's the total formula revenue. So I guess I'll have to check my math on that percentage piece there, Jonathan, but yeah. So that, you know, makes up over 90% of our revenue. That's why it's obviously it's a huge issue. We have high cost disability grant, which is one of the carve outs from the state school fund budget. Services provided through the Willamette ESD. You end up getting to our current projected resources of just over $42 million, plus a projected beginning fund balance, and our total current resources available would be $47.2 million. Now, in terms of the requirements, you could see that they're grouped basically by what's going directly into the schools versus what's basically a district-wide requirement, departments as well as transportation, and then a couple of add-ons at the bottom there. So when you hear from the department heads here just in a little bit, their department budgets will reconcile to these numbers. So for example, when you hear from Andy on general administration, which includes the superintendent's budget as well as the board, that'll reconcile to the $740,275, for example. Dandy and Jennifer, when they come up and present, that is kind of a miscellaneous catch basin of departments. We have human resources, curriculum, assessment, teaching and learning, but also on that budget is transportation. So you'll take the human resources line item plus transportation, and that bottom line will match for you. Technology the same, business the same. Maintenance will reconcile to the last three line items there under school requirements, building operation and upkeep, which includes all of our custodial services and grounds and projects and supplies and those types of things, our property casualty insurance and our utilities. And those three numbers will be reconciled to the facility maintenance budget. So just to kind of give you a feel for that. As far as the schools, who you'll hear from on May 2nd, and the next page we're going to take a quick look at is the school allocation page. Basically, you'll be able to take the numbers, school requirements there, the 21 million, and so the first 5 line items, plus the counseling allocation at the bottom, and that will reconcile to the total school allocation. And that $26+ million that shows up on the school allocation page is what the schools all have to work with in their budgets. And you'll see their individual budget worksheets. We'll be getting those out the week of the 22nd. So you'll have plenty of time to review those in time for the meeting on the 2nd when all the principals will present to you. So that's the way that all shapes out. And the school allocation page under the allocations tab will give you a little more information about how the money is allocated out to the schools. We walked through this last year, and Jacob asked a great question about the kindergarten piece, and we didn't change it again. I'll tell you why. But basically, there's two main things that occurred change-wise for the school allocation page. So we have the enrollment in the upper left, and it's got the last 3 enrollment figures from October 1st. Now, in the past, and this is enrollment with still half-day kindergarten. And the reason for that is when the state went from funding kindergarten as half, 0.5, to a full, in transition, since we were working with the giving the schools allocating money based on a 3-year average, we wanted to wait to get through that period until we changed the enrollment up here to full. We've made it past that, but in working with the numbers, it was very hard, especially since kindergarten has our lowest class size. It was really hard to just say, okay, now we're going to make all the schools as full. It works for the schools that don't have kindergarten. For the schools that do, since there's such different sizes of schools versus total enrollment, and kindergarten classes could be rather small, it was hard to just add an additional half here and allow the schools to have enough money to operate as they are currently. It was actually making the budget tighter for them. So we did a couple things. One is we left the kindergarten allocation as a separate column at the bottom like we have, and basically just left that formula the way it is. We left the half kindergarten up in the enrollment columns. But what we did do, which seemed to help all the buildings, was instead of taking the 3-year average, we decided to match this allocation now based on the same thing that ODE does, the greater of this year or the previous year. And we gave them the benefit of whatever that bigger number was, and it seemed to help everyone just a little bit. We also tweaked the small school 5% to less than 200, minimum 5. There's this kind of a small school weighted kind of membership added to their allocation. That was, I think, 150. So I think we brought 2 more schools into the loop on that, which helped their allocations. The other thing that we did was I lost my notes. Yeah, I guess that was it. So three changes. So when you follow this all through, each school has a total weighted enrollment, kind of like we do as a district. And then there's a funding factor based on what school configuration they are, whether they're a K2, the 3-5, the K8, or the middle school or the high school. And they have X amount of weighted enrollment for their funding. We increased the per ADMW to $5,630 per student. Our goal, as Annie mentioned in the superintendent's budget message, was to be able to maintain programs and staffing at their current levels, and which obviously a huge part of that is to be able to cover the increased cost of PERS. The average teacher cost this year is $102,000, salaries and benefits. Last year it was budgeted at $97,500. Obviously a huge part of that is the PERS increase. So we had to make sure that we were able to allocate enough for schools to be able to budget with their current staffing levels. So then you can just follow it all the way across. Of course, there's an admin allocation for principals and secretaries. We added the counseling allocation last year, and we kept that the same in terms of FTE. We just increased it for the cost of inflation. And so basically then you get the total school budget allocation there at the bottom, $26,590,000, which again you can reconcile back to that revenue page that I discussed on the previous tab. Are there any questions on those two sheets at all?
I have a question, Steve, on the maintenance materials that you provided in the workbook.
Yes.
I got curious about what the average per student cost would be of the
For maintenance?
For the individual schools. And it ranges from about $150 per student up to close to $500. The average for the district is $303 per student. Why is there such a wide difference between if you're allocating on a weighted or adjusted enrollment basis? Why is there such a wide disparity between the schools?
That's a great question, Charles. And Lauren will be presenting the maintenance budget, but the maintenance dollars are not included on this allocation. This is what the schools budget for their school budgets, but the custodians for those schools are in the maintenance budget. So when you look through the maintenance budget, if you were to look at the total for each school, it's quite possible that you saw quite a range of cost per student, but each school has a different amount of deferred maintenance projects going on this year. And it's not equal across the board. There might be more projects going on at one school than another based on need. Maybe there's another school that's going to get more at their school the next year. Those will be covered in Lauren's presentation. But if you were looking at the maintenance budget and doing the total for each school, which again is not part of that number, it's part of the maintenance budget number, then that's how you would get quite a wide range of cost per student.
So how do I simplify your answer? Just to say that some schools have a lot of deferred maintenance and therefore?
Well, a lot of
the number
schools,
different?
all the schools do, but we can only afford to do so much. So it really, we would have to pull one-time or projects that are just occurring in one particular year out of your total number for the school and just look at what is the custodian cost and the supplies and the utilities, the year-over-year expenses, and then divide it by the students in that school to get more of an accurate figure to compare on more of an ongoing basis for those schools. Because, you know, one year, well, I know Central Howell, they need to have a $85,000 roof replacement on their gym, but next year they won't have that in their budget, that type of thing.
So good. Is this reflected somewhere in the budget so that we can look at that?
What, the project? Well, it's
Yeah,
all,
by school, you know, where there is deferred maintenance and it's an unusual
Yeah,
expenditure
all
for
the,
that year.
all of the projects are listed in the maintenance budget. They don't all come out of the general fund, however. We do have some budgeted out of the capital projects fund, for example. So when you look at, again, if you go back to the revenue and allocations page, the school allocations page is not taking into account any repair and maintenance at all. Those numbers that add up to the 26 million doesn't even include the custodians and those type, and the projects that are happening. That's included in this $3.6 million number right here on the revenue page, in part of Lauren's repair and maintenance budget.
Well, the reason I started this analysis was to try to figure out if some of the older schools are draining some of our resources and whether we should be addressing that question. I didn't actually reach that conclusion from my analysis, but the analysis showed a wide variance.
Well, I think we'd have to take a look at not only the projects that are planned to be completed this year, not just out of the general fund, but out of other funds, but also the projects that aren't being done and the projects that need to be done next year and into the future. And we actually have a facility assessment going on right now, and we have a state grant to help pay for some of that. So we'll be getting even more information on the facilities needs over the next few months. And there'll be a long-range facility committee that assembles later this year. So.
Hey, Charles, I wanted to ask or mention one thing to you, and correct me if I'm wrong. Lauren Stanley has come to our board meetings and given us updates on the maintenance of the facilities and projects that either need to be done in the future or that have been completed. There's no price next to that, but Lauren does have documents similar to this that have that has each school and what their maintenance and what needs to be done. So that might be something you might want to ask Lauren when he comes up, you know, if he wants to provide that list to us, or you could talk to him another time. But those documents might correlate with what he's going to be talking about tonight too. So does that help you?
Well, we're going to be asked to budget for these needs at
You're
some
right.
point.
Yeah, and Lauren might have that
Since we're not
tonight.
being asked to determine whether a new building would be preferable to continuing to maintain the old ones.
Right.
I want to raise the issue so that the board can consider that in their
Right.
responsibility.
Yeah, very true. And Lauren might have some answers for you in his presentation as well.
Jennifer Gibbs.
I just wanted to affirm Charles' inquiry because I think it is something that is questioned in the community. And so it might be something that the board wants to put in that parking lot that we talked about.
Yeah.
How can we look at we have a diverse range of facilities, and how can we look at them and the costs and just look at things from different points of view and have those discussions so that we are actually using data to have discussions instead of just perceptions. So that was I actually have another question. Can I ask?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I wanted to look at the funding factor, because again, this is another question that comes up in the community. I know that the high school has a different funding factor than the K-8s, and they have a different funding factor than the middle school and Robert Frost and Mark Twain. Can we talk about that? And that doesn't have to be from Steve necessarily, but how can I justify that when that question comes up, is my question.
I have the same question, so that's great.
It is a good question.
Steve, can you speak to that? Is that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to help too, Steve.
Yeah, the premise basically is that it costs more, to run a comprehensive high school than, educating a first grader, that type of thing. So there's a little more funding factor the further you go up in grade. I don't know exactly, how or when it arrived at this particular factor, and Andy might have a little more on that, but.
Yeah, it's Steve's spot on. You'll notice that the funding factor for intermediate school, or excuse me, elementary school is 1.0. That would be from the K-5 level. That funding factor was established a number of years ago, and it is something that's pretty well understood that there are with self-contained general ed classrooms at the elementary level that don't have the kind of specialties that you would see at a comprehensive high school, say for instance career and technical education or purchasing of home economic kind of materials, or operation of even things like the fine arts, ceramics and music, which require purchase of instruments, etc. Quite a few more supplies that are required in a high school setting, and less so in a middle school setting, and even less so in an elementary setting. So that funding factor recognizes that. I think you could look at the converse, and that is if every school had the same funding factor, this high school would be significantly underfunded. And this factor addresses that. It can surely be reviewed at some time, but this has withstood the test of time, and I think it's an accurate reflection of the needs of our schools.
I have a question about that. How long has that funding factor been in place? You said a number of years, but how long since it's been reviewed for data pulled in to kind of set?
Yeah, probably since the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, in that range. I can't say with certainty.
Okay.
One of the questions that I had with it, the only one that's new since I last saw this, because I've seen this before, was the Silverton Middle School.
Mm-hmm.
How was the 1.05 derived? And I mean, it doesn't quite mathematically factor out to how the K-8s are handled, so I'm just curious how where that number came from.
That's splitting the difference between the 1.1 of a high school formula and a 1.0 of an elementary. So K-5 is 1.0, 6, 7, 8 is 1.05, 9, 12 is 1.1.
And K-8 is even between those.
And yeah, and K-8,
Well, that's what I mean. Like if
do the
you
calculation.
if you did the math and came up with an average, right? The K-8, I mean, it's overweighted slightly. And I'm just curious if that was intentional or if that was just a round number that people liked, or where that came from.
You mean the 1.01175?
No, the 1.05.
1.05 is overweighted compared to
Yeah,
the same grade levels at a K-8.
It's not quite in that middle.
Well, because what you're saying, right, is the K, like 3 is less. I mean, that's kind of weighting less, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Like K2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're kind of weighted less.
So the K through 3,
The
that's
K-8
the
has
Well,
to
yeah,
balance that
K-
out then, right? Because they have both. They have
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
the weighting.
exactly.
That's why it's not matching up.
That's correct.
But then the middle school came into play, and it's
Right.
maybe not exactly right in between K-8 and.
Well, you could have just taken,
Yeah.
1.1 and
Yeah.
1.1. I mean, you could have come up with a number that
Yeah.
matched, and it doesn't. And I was just curious.
Honestly, as I recall, there was a lot of unknowns moving into that building, and of course, having some more grade configuration changes, and it seemed like the initial blush at it, the allocation just wasn't quite enough, and I don't know that we really came back to that number.
So
but
the
I know
number
it's still-
followed the sort of evaluation of the money as opposed to the money following the number. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think there was some design of the 1.05 coming in at, making inference that it's half that of the 1.1 funding at the middle. It may not be exact math, and I think it's worth review, Jonathan. I do, and I think we'd have to take some time to really analyze that.
Yeah.
Maybe even get someone to support us in that review.
I'd be curious to see some of that data.
Yeah. I'd like to see it.
And so with the measure $98 in that factor, and I asked that when we had the information meeting, that 98, how much did that bring extra in to the budget when that passed? I mean, I know it's not fully funded.
Yeah, so it was just over 500,000 per year this biennium, so just over $1 million over the course of the biennium, and it's being utilized both high school and middle school. And it's not part of this general fund budget, it's in Fund 200.
Yeah, that's what I was like, so it's not in that
No.
allocation
No.
factor, so then essentially, kind of mentioning that factor.
That's new additional
That
money,
factor
yeah.
that took into account the CTE, then the $98 came in, and that factor didn't go down because now there's additional funds coming from 98.
Right.
So that's one of my questions later was how is that 98 spread across all grades, because if CTE doesn't happen just high school.
Sure.
And you said the middle school, but the
Yeah.
98 fund is
And also helps
kind
with
of.
summer school and things that the high school would normally pay for.
Yeah, I can chime in there. I mean, Measure 98 is targeted revenue. It's not to supplant existing programs. And so realistically, the factor wouldn't decrease because these are additional supports and programs and let's say CTE, attendance focused, dropout prevention strategies that are add-ons. So if the Measure 98 were to go away, the general fund revenue would remain the same, and we would discontinue use of those additional programs. So it's a supplanting matter, and which we have to be very, very careful about maintaining.
I understand that, the fund coming in, that distribution, if it's being weighted, the extra programs being weighted at the middle school and the high school, which already has a higher weighting, that just kind of, for me, it raises a little question, is it fair to the K-5, that they're not getting a little extra, that $98, to build them and bring them on?
But we can't do that.
I didn't hear that, Andy.
We can't do that. It's, the Measure 98 are targeted dollars for additional programs and services that have to be approved by the Department of Education. We have a plan in place and everything. So, and they're not to supplant existing programs.
I understand that, there are additional programming in the CTE realm and the graduation, and we can have that discussion later. I don't want to do that now. I was questioning where the $98, how much was added, and what that factor stayed the same, but additional programming at the K-5, it's not being, additional programming, not supplementing, is not being addressed at the $98 right now.
They're
No,
not
I'm
allowed to
confused.
use the high school success dollars for K-5. They only they're earmarked for high school, they're targeted for high school graduation rates. We can use up to 15% of our district's allocation for grade 8 only, but we can't access or utilize those funds for grades K-7.
So I mean, I look back, and I worked with some folks, and they were maybe giving me some broader definition of what 98 is and how that funds are being used at other districts.
So there
from
is
ODE.
one thing I want to tell you is that there is a document that Jennifer Hannon produced when the Measure 98 money was available to us and the district received it. And she broke down exactly where that money went and how much money went to what, and what the decision was of our administration decided to put that according to the requirements of Measure 98. So if you'd like to have a copy of that, you could ask Andy or administration, they would probably be happy to give you a
Yeah,
copy.
I mean, it'd be
just so
great,
you
it'd help
can
me
see.
clarify, because I've
Yeah.
worked with other programs that are
Yep.
using that $98 in
Yeah.
some very loose, but still legal ways.
And that's a good clarifying
And that'd
question,
help.
actually. The administration team could get you that document. They presented it to us at a board meeting. That way you can examine that as a budget committee member and see how that works in the budget. Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Okay, yeah.
Charles, I just wanted to end on that facility question. I think the way I would say we need to now analyze that is when we get the full comprehensive facility assessment report from the architects in a few months, we'd be able to say, okay, so what are the total needs, high-level needs at all the buildings that you take 2, 3, 4 years to do, and some things we're not gonna have any funding for unless we were to pass a bond, for example. But basically take the total of those needs and look at the total dollars and total amount per student. I think that might be looking at it just in this year's budget, we're only budgeting what we can, highest level needs is what we can afford, so it'd be kind of hard to say that the per student number would be a good way to look at it just based on what's in this year's budget. So I just wanted to kind of maybe come back to that idea.
I'm curious to know if the facilities assessment is going to be a directed assessment, you know, some values being given to the architect to assess?
So Lauren will, he can answer the question in terms of how that process is going right now, because that's happening now. So.
I asked that question because I got the report from the focus group, and there are many comments from the community about our facilities. And some of them have to do with selling the schools, for example, and using the revenues from that to build a different, improved facility. And if that's not being considered by the architect, I'd like to know.
Yeah, Lauren could speak to what that process is looking like when he comes up, and also, I think a lot of that would be something that the Long Range Facility Planning Committee that will come together, after the assessment part of the project would need to address for sure.
Yeah, I'll be happy when I get up there, Charles. I'll be happy to discuss
Thank you.
where we're at with that process and how we're doing it and fill you in.
So, Mr. Chair, we want to get the departments up here. I'll take 5 minutes or less, just real quickly, do 30,000 foot view, basically. Under your proposed budget tab, this is the official Oregon Department of Revenue required, ODE required format for a budget. And it includes the general fund, but also all of our other funds. And on page 3, I always talk about this a little bit, but basically there's a description of funds, just as a reminder of the different funds that we have, other than the general fund. The Fund 200 being special revenue funds, funds that must be used for a specific purpose. Our debt service funds, Funds 300, our capital project funds, Fund 400, and our internal service funds, Fund 600. And you could re-examine those. But I also, in the supplement section, the last supplements that I have provide some helpful material for what goes into, for example, Fund 200, which is our grants and projects fund. It includes a lot of different grants. So there's 2 pages that are to help you with that. One is a page taken directly from our audit report called the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. So awards like Title I, Title II, IDEA, the U.S. Department of Ag Child Nutrition, which is actually Fund 210 that goes into that fund. That's just a recap of how much money comes in from the federal government in terms of grants. And then there's a page after that, excuse me, might even be before that. I don't see it here. The page that Jennifer, yes, in the back, there's a 3-page document that Jennifer Hannon presented at the January school board meeting that recaps all of the different grants that come through our district, whether they're state. Well, it's the awards other than the federal awards on the Schedule of Federal Awards. You can see how much is going on there, whether they be seismic grants that go through our capital project fund, or CTE Career Pathway Grant, Measure 98, seismic grants, outdoor school grant. So this is just a reminder of what was presented back in January and what gets budgeted for in Fund 200. So I know it's a ton of information, but I'd rather over-provide than under-provide, so. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go into the different departments here. First on our list is Drew Hines with the Technology Department budget.
Well, good evening. I'm Drew Hines. This is Susie McMullen, Help Desk Manager. I'm your Technology Director in the school district. I'm here to walk you through the budget worksheet for technology. Provided you a handout that kind of lays out a little bit more about our school district. We're about fast internet, quality display, friendly service, and those are the kind of tenets of the service we provide the students and teachers. We're very aware of our student involvement. If you're not familiar, we have about 50 student techs that work with us throughout the course of the year and during the summer, and about 25 that work on the CMTV side with regard to video recording and editing and producing things. So I'll share a little bit about any changes within the existing budget worksheet, and then I'll have Susie talk a little bit about our help desk very briefly about how that student program operates from the perspective of under the help desk manager. I do want to introduce, before we go into that, a total cost of ownership model. Total cost of ownership implies you don't just buy hardware, but you have to provide infrastructure and training as well as the hardware. And so you always have to be thinking about how to support the technology with the infrastructure, the wires in the walls, the wireless that you have for the internet, the switching, the stuff you don't ever see, that every 300 feet within a building exists. And so that infrastructure is really critical to maintain. And in most of our school districts, we have at least 10-year-old switches that'll continue to need to be updated. And we have staff, Batman and Thor, that work very hard on the back end to keep those things running. So Brett and Ty are two staff that are excellent at that work. So we have a good team. So total cost of ownership implies we invest in hardware. And you see on our budget worksheet, we have essentially 3 sections that represent FTE, really the staff, which aligns pretty closely with what Steve mentioned. 70–80% of your budget typically goes to staffing, and we have a great team, all superheroes, literally. So and the next is hardware with regard to staff and student computers, and then you have kind of other services. And software as a service is something you'll hear nowadays. You don't necessarily buy software, you own it, you rent it, and then you pay a monthly service fee or an annual fee. And so that's represented in our numbers here as well. So let me go through just a couple of the changes in the budget worksheet, and then have Susie share a little bit about our help desk, and then we'll be done with some of your questions. So the first, there's an Integrate Ed conference that's offered each year that will help us with technology integration. Nancy Griffith does a great job working with curriculum, having that continued vision of how to support the teachers, and getting that core group of the technology committee working together to keep that planning moving is what the intention of that is. It's a good conference, happens in the wintertime with a couple of staff, that's all we need. The next change is Nextel phones. We don't use those anymore. The student tech supplies, as I mentioned, we've increased the ability for us to continue to train IT staff. Those students go off and work in all over the state. In fact, we're a favorite hiring point of contact for a lot of state agencies in Salem, as well as up through Beaverton, Hillsborough, Portland. So we have students that come back about every other week or so, it seems, as a guest speaker to talk a little bit more about what they're doing in the field. And that's really critical because they are always current. They're working and then they come back and feed the program and encourage the students to go into things like artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, some of those things that are kind of cutting edge right now. So the next point, student tech supplies I mentioned. As again, software as a service is changing, and we have agreements with Google and Microsoft to order to provide services. Microsoft in particular has a service agreement, an enterprise service agreement that they're changing some interpretation from, which we're kind of has forced our hand to increase our budget here. Their interpretation is full. In the past, we've been able to say part-time students or part-time teachers count in a count of, I think it's 280 total user accounts that we would purchase on an annual basis. Well, now they've interpreted that as full-time staff. So any time we issue an email address to a staff person, we have to pay the service and the connectivity fee. It's a change that every school district is struggling with because it is an increase in cost. But it's again reflective of the current days where we need to pay for software as a service. And we've gotten kind of away with it for a while with 280. And if you count for all of our staff members, including classified staff and custodians, it's going to represent an increase because of the way they're interpreting that. So not much we can do about that. The hardware support and communications is some software that allows us to deploy remotely without having to drive out to one of our 13 schools to update and do some efficiency work there. And then the switching infrastructure is represented by the last one, in network hardware. We'll be looking over the next year at upgrading the wireless through gigabit switching, so there's a faster pipe to the wireless network that we have. That's where we're going to double down. If you plug into the wall, you get 100 megabit. If you're wireless, there should be a gigabit connection shared within the number of devices that are connected. And most of the time, we're pretty close to okay, but if a teacher said, all right, all 36 students hit this YouTube video at the same time, you'll see a little bit of lag. And so getting a gigabit switch to those wireless access points will increase our infrastructure. It's a good, wise investment for our next step. So with that, I'd like to have Susie just share a little bit about our student program. And I can go back to talking about display and infrastructure. If you'd like to answer questions you have, but at this time, I'd like Susie to talk a little about our program.
Like Drew said, we have an exciting program that we have students, we involve students, and I love working with students. We have a ticket system that I manage the tickets to the staff and the students. The students, they learn hands-on, which is really important for technology because it's always changing, and they learn by taking apart computers either by or recycling the different parts of them. They learn about the computers, then they take them apart to upgrade the memory or the hard drive. They help us with setting up computers, Chromebooks, iPads, printers, all kinds of things. They also learn, we bring people in and to talk with them and work with them, and that are out in the job force that they learn from. Then there's small groups that we have. They work right along with us to troubleshoot a lot of the tickets that we have. So it's really exciting to watch them grow and work right along with us all throughout the year.
And you see on our infographic page that there's 3,300 tickets closed. That's since July 1st. So that's on average between 20 and 30 tickets, and it could occur 35 to 40 minutes apart, across the school district. So Susie and I and all of our technicians are hopping every day. There's always something to do.
I have a question about that. So last year, your infographic showed 1,000. So that's a pretty big uptick in your tickets.
It was 2,500. I mean, I'd have to go back and look. Do you have it from
Oh, yeah, I
last
have
year?
it. I brought it.
Okay.
1,000 tickets closed.
No.
So I just was wondering if that's because we're more one-to-one now and have more issues, and is that something that we should anticipate spending more time on, closing tickets?
Yeah, we'll have to check on those numbers. There might have been a
I made
couple on
that
that.
change this afternoon, so
But-
I apologize. It might have been 1,300.
But I
Oh,
believe it
okay.
has, I believe it has increased. We were on average, I've been here for 2 years, and my first year, I think we were up in the 150s. But now we're down into the 50 range, so we're keeping it right at about 50 tickets. And the students have stepped up, and we've got, if they start with us during their freshman year and we get them through senior, they help us knock those tickets out even faster. And yeah, we've got it real.
On average, 20 to 30 tickets a day is our typical
Yeah.
day. September and January, we could be as high as 35 or 40, and those are rough days. But then it depends on what's going on in the district too. We may have something going on in our auditorium in the afternoon. We're going to set up a budget meeting that we have to set up for, something like that.
How many students?
About 50 on the IT side and about 25 on the Scan TV side. And that doesn't necessarily represent the students who forecast for digital media 1, 2, and 3, which our own Abby Shetler teaches. She is Wonder Woman and then some. She's got skills like nobody's business with Photoshop, Premiere, Illustrator. And she's bringing those students up to be the social media directors, the social media managers of the future. And she's doing a great job of that. And then I get the cream of the crop for Scan TV. Those kids that want a different kind of environment. And it's a good fit for those kiddos.
Jennifer, I think
Well,
I stepped over you.
That's okay. You guys don't give a report to us very often, so that I'm gonna ask things maybe a little bit more than budget, or just say things. I just wanted to say this. I have heard personally from somebody in the tech world who says that the kids that come out of Silverton are well prepared. So I know you said that, but I heard it too, and that's just thrilling. And what was my other thing I wanted to say?
Well, you're thinking, we're lined up with the A+ certification, CompTIA, so our A+, Network Plus, Server Security Plus certifications, which has also helped our staff, because I'm pushing them to work towards certs, and I'm taking cert assessments as well, to stay current with the professionals in the field. And as a technician, you just learn to do that. Typically, when you're looking to change jobs, and so at that point, I won't necessarily overqualify my staff, but because I'll lose them. But Susie and others, all of our staff members, typically they're going to be very open to sticking around and being part of the team. And it's a really special climate. I encourage you to come visit anytime. Check, of course, schedule an appointment with high school staff. Make sure we're ready for you, but you're welcome to come during the event.
It's a neat use of budget dollars, because you get the service, the kids get the training, and we all save money. You know, are there many schools that have programs like this?
Very few.
Okay.
Intermountain ESD is trying to do what we're doing. There's 3 or 4 other districts that have tried. There's a couple of Washington State school districts that do this. There's some magic that goes on. I've worked at 3 different districts in the State Department. By the way, I just wanted to mention, it takes for a school district like us to have an SSCP to really operate well, and that is the super smart and capable person. And that is Steve. When I have a budget question or something that has to do with like where we're going or how we allow students to do things or how to budget for things, Steve, we really appreciate you when in this process it's showcased. He knows as much or more about state budgeting than some of the people that I worked with at the Oregon Department of Education for 7 years. So we really appreciate it. When it comes down to running this program and others, it takes a unique skill set, and so we have a good team to do that.
I believe it keeps our staff down too, when we have the students help us. And Drew's really good about keeping their learning rounded with online learning, people coming in, teaching them right hands-on. Yeah, he makes it a good balance there, so they really get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on, agree with what Jennifer said. We don't get reports from you guys, so I'll talk about the process. But so the kids are going out and interacting with the staff. what do the staff think of that, seeing a student come home?
So first of all, it's easier, maybe you have a better perspective on this.
Well, we don't just give them any ticket. When we first get them, we do a lot of training
This is the Susie
and that
magic.
kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then slowly we give them a little, like a toner change cartridge thing, and they do good with that. And then we kind of get to know them individually, and a lot of them have background in technology already, and
Mhm.
they know more than we do. So we kind of get to know them and figure out what they can do. And then we give them some customer service training too, little bits at a time, and then work with them, get feedback from the teachers and how they did, or that kind of thing. And we're in constant communication with the staff and what their needs are, and we work with the students. So we're right there with them. So.
Susie does a great job of the feedback loop. It's really tight to check in with that teacher to see if it got solved. And then that daily monitoring on top of it.
I get emails and everything they update their tickets and everything. They learn how to do all that on their own, but I get updates on exactly what they've done
That's great.
in each ticket.
That's great.
I have a question for you. Did you touch on the professional development training that went from 1,000 to 3,000? I might have missed that if I was looking at something else.
No, I think, for the most part, that's our LearnKey software that the students have access to as well.
So you anticipate some more development training?
That covers the cost of our students and our staff having access to
Okay.
A+ Network Plus Security Service Plus certifications.
Okay.
And the video training, the online video training Susie brought.
Oh, I see. Okay, I think that's what I was looking for, was that. Okay, thank you. I just need a clarification. Thanks.
Charles.
Oh, yeah, Charles.
You didn't mention maintaining the system for the classroom. Is that part of your responsibility?
Absolutely. Infrastructure for the classroom or the hardware?
For the STAR system or any of the other?
Yeah, so the data integration is where I would call that. So anytime we touch, I call them bricks. So essentially, if we adopt a curriculum or a student information system or a phone system or one phone now, or just about everything touches some piece of data that's either staff or student connected. So yeah, every time the staff decide that they want to implement a new software, we're in the loop. I'm at the meeting where some of the demos are happening, and I'll involve our staff as needed to make those data integrations happen. And the magic is when you have single sign-on. So one student signs on once and they have access to all the things instead of just one. And that's absolutely rocket science. It takes a long time, 3 months to 6 months, to make sure that all of the things connect, to make sure that when the student signs on, they see all of those things. So that's a piece we don't even necessarily talk about, is data systems integration.
So those services are included in this budget?
Yep. Thanks for the question, Charles. All right.
Any other questions?
I've got one, but it's probably for our SSCP. So the 6.9% increase in staffing costs, is that just a blanket thing that's going to be on all of these, right? Is that just consistent throughout the whole thing?
Yes, because of the PERS increase.
Right, so I was just going to ask you to give us a quick rundown of where that 6.9 went. And then we won't have to ask during any of the other ones.
You talking about just on?
Well, it's not just, I'm guessing it's consistent on all of these, right?
Yeah, it is.
So-
Could be a step increase, which is usually between 2 and 3%. Classified 2.25% COLA, the taxes and PERS on the additional salary, as well as the 4% additional PERS cost on the payroll. So that's going to be, consistent where you see the same amount of FTE. And obviously, there could be some areas that have a little more FTE.
So it's sort of just peanut buttered as a percentage increase across all of the, I was just looking for clarity on that, thank you.
So like, for example, I brought the teacher cost, so went from 97,500 to 102,000 total cost.
Is that
Same.
also 6, I didn't do the math. That's
Same,
it's the
type
same
of-
increase?
Yeah, well, 6.9 exactly.
Any questions?
Same concept.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, Peterson, special education.
Anybody want to stretch? We're getting there. Good evening, I'm Dana Peterson. I think I know almost everybody here, but I'm the Director of Special Education. My duties as the director are really to support all the students in the district that are eligible and get special education services. It seems like one kind of consistent thing, but I can let you know, as you can see by the number of my budget, it is a large budget, that special education runs wide and it runs really deep. And it's individualized for each student. So in the district here, we really try, obviously, to meet kids where they're at, and some of those kids need a lot more support than others. We do have a few increases in the budget this year. Those costs encompass us adhering to federal and state regulations in which protect students and their supports. We stay in compliance, which does take a lot of administrative duties. A lot of our requirements are centered and costs around personnel, equipment, technology, professional development, and of course just that compliance and administrative side of following all the federal and state regulations. So if you want to flip to the special services tab, my budget worksheet is there. I'm going to go through and highlight a couple areas that there are some increases, and then there are a couple supplemental data sheets that I gave to you that we can review after that. And obviously, if you have any questions, you can certainly ask. So the top of my worksheet is salaries and payroll. I do have an increase. We seem in this district, not only because of our location and the long time that it takes to drive from, say, Silvercrest all the way back out to Scotts Mills. We have a lot of students in the district that do require communication services, so speech and language and articulation services. Currently, we have 3 speech pathologists, 2 of those that we contract through Willamette ESD. One is our own employee, which has been a great addition this year. We are looking to add an additional speech language pathologist for next year, so total we will have 4 within the district. Those ladies run all day long. If we didn't have such a large area to cover, I don't think we need that additional FTE, but we are really struggling to keep up with the minutes that are required by law once those minutes are put on students' IEPs. So we're looking at increasing 1 full-time person there. If you go down to the explanation, kind of mid of that section is the out-of-district specialized programs and tuitions. It's a big increase. So this is where we're seeing a lot of our students show up that are trauma, have a lot of trauma. We're having kids that are coming with mental health conditions. And we have great programs. We have awesome structured learning programs in this district, K through high school, that help support those students. What we're finding is we are getting students coming into our community that really public schools cannot support properly. These students really need a placement in a either residential facility or day treatment facility or sometimes a specialized school. So this year we do have 1 student that is in a specialized school in Portland that we transport every day. Our hope is always that those kids come back to us, that they remain our kiddos. We never want them to leave and never come back. But sometimes those kids need that intensive support from mental health professionals, social workers, and things that public schools just don't do. We also are currently contracting with Cascade School District for slots in their therapeutic day program. So we have a couple of students that we transport to Turner every day. And they get the support of a licensed therapist in that classroom and also additional special ed supports and teachers. So I know that's a new line item. It's a lot of money. I'm hoping to keep that consistent. And we definitely, we look at that as our last resort. These are our students. We want them to stay here, but we also want to recognize when the need is greater than what a public school can offer. If you go down towards the bottom under health services, I'm also helping support the nursing services in our district. Again, we are seeing a huge increase in the need for nursing services. Again, because the actual size of our district, it makes it very difficult for the 2.5 nurses we currently have to make it to every building for students who have some severe medical conditions. We are looking at increasing those hours. We are hoping to help support the K-8s, especially rural K-8s. What we're finding is that it used to be, you know, maybe we had a couple of kids maybe at Central Howell, or we had a couple of kids at Prattham. Now we have kids with medical conditions that need a nurse's support in every building in the district. And sometimes those require daily support. We also have very medically fragile children in town, so they also require a nurse to be around. This is just kind of it's what every district is seeing. More kids are coming to school that have really severe medical needs, and I think our staff, our nursing staff, does an amazing job of helping support families and parents, train students, especially a big one is diabetics, so type 1 diabetes. For students, we do a great job, I think, of helping support those kids, do plans to teach them how to advocate for themselves, and hopefully by 4th, 5th grade, they are doing their own medical work themselves. They're checking their own sugars, they're able to tell someone if they don't feel well. But until then, we need a lot of support. And I know last year and this year we have at least 10 type 1 diabetics under the age of 3rd grade. So, and they're spread out throughout the district. We've also had an influx of students with cystic fibrosis, which is a unique diagnosis. They are at 3 different schools currently. So we have nurses that need to check on them, have specific medical requirements, especially regarding, you know, common colds and kids that like to touch things. So we're doing a lot of education on those students in particular. So as you can see, we just have a lot of unique and different things that take up those nurses' time. We have in district total, as of today, 488 medical protocols, district-wide. So that's a lot of kids for 2.5 ladies to manage and to check up on and to keep current. We review those protocols every year, so we know as a district that we can tell families their kids are safe when they're at school. So hopefully we'll be able to find someone to fill those hours. If you go down again under speech and audiology services, it says translation services. Last year that was a new one for us at $33,000. It's gonna fluctuate. Right now it's running, we're predicting it's gonna run a little bit less. We have quite a number of students that are deaf, hard of hearing in our district. And as they get older, that technology gets more expensive, but it's really exciting. So this is for translation services. We have 2 students at the high school that currently use those, especially during science classes, when sometimes the language is too difficult or a teacher speaks too fast. So as they're listening in class, they have their Chromebook, and then the translation comes across for them. It also takes notes. It can listen to conversations around, so if their peers, they get in a small peer group, it can help translate that, and then they can take home and read the notes. So it's been really helpful for a couple of students. I don't think it's going anywhere because, again, we have quite a few kids in the district and they are all moving up. I don't see them going anywhere. We're hoping that the technology is actually getting cheaper. We're hoping that Willamette ESD, since we contract with them, a lot of services will come up with something less expensive. So we'll see. Technology is always changing, so hopefully we can find something that's not as expensive to help support those students. Those are like the 4 biggest changes we have on this budget. If you want to, before I go, does anyone have a question about those?
I just had one on the nursing services. It said here it's Medicaid funds. Is that 100% Medicaid
Yes,
funds?
currently we can fund that through Medicaid funds. So we do also bill Medicaid for some of our most medically fragile students in the district. It's good and bad. It's great when we get those funds because it helps provide these services. It also requires a licensed RN to help do the management and administrative paperwork. So it kind of takes her out of the field a little bit to get that, but it's definitely well worth it. Linda Brown did a great job when she was here setting this up. We are probably one of the most successful districts in the state of Oregon that run it because Sue Ellen Knight, who's been our nurse for a very long time here, has kind of like got it down to an awesome, quick deal. She knows what she's doing. We know how to bill. We meet with federal Medicaid folks and a nurse every year to verify we're following the law, and we're compliant, we're billing for what we need to, so it's been really great. I know a lot of districts are trying to get into it. It's hard to find a nurse that wants to do that much work. But it's been great for this district. We've gotten a lot of amazing supports from that money, especially nursing services, for sure. Does anyone else have any questions?
Real quick, because you mentioned that you're providing some of the services for the specialized program, the tuition. Where is that money coming from now, since it wasn't in?
That
budget?
is, most of that is, I don't know, the funding, I might have to have Steve help me with that. Funding for special education is not fun. It comes from all sorts of different grants that we get, federal and state. So I'm not sure if I know exactly where that extra money, can you help me with that, Steve?
Well, if a student pops up that costs that much money, you have to take care of it. So sometimes it's, you know, just we have to allocate additional monies from the general fund. But this particular budget worksheet is a little different than the rest too, because if you go to page 2 of the budget worksheet, you'll see the total special services budget request is $6.6 million. 5.3 of which is coming out of the general fund, which reconciles back to the revenue allocation page that I mentioned. So you can see that it nets down for the general fund because of the other sources, non-general fund sources of revenue, including the IDEA federal grant and the Medicaid money that Dana mentions. Also, we do get the high-cost disability grant, which is is part of the general fund revenue on that revenue page, which obviously supports, also goes to support the special services budget. So that budget allocation went up a little bit because we have, I think, 41 high-cost disability grant students, and I think we're projecting 43 or 44. And the way that works is any student that costs more than $30,000 per year, you get a portion of the amount that you spend above $30,000, but it's subject to the pool of money that the state has available. So to answer the question, there are some additional resources available for students that cost over $30,000, but for a student that costs way more than $30,000, it's just we have to find a way to fund it. Bottom line.
I was asking just because I was curious where the money was. It had to be coming from somewhere. You didn't see it, but now it's dedicated. And it's there.
Yeah.
And then and then the last real quick one was on the sub-district wide. It's gone up quite a bit.
Yes.
Is that just because you were experiencing, going over the budget?
That's mostly gone up because we've hired a lot more employees. We have, in the years that I've been here, we've probably at least doubled the skilled, the special needs assistants in the district, mostly because we have that many more special ed students that require adult support. So that number, I think, has gone up because we actually have more employees.
And those aren't listed here under the salaries. I was looking at that.
Yes, so down at the very bottom, where it says total hours special needs, it says, in little parentheses, it says 56 special needs assistants.
Okay.
So that's
where it is.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't understand what that was. Okay.
So this budget, the goal is to cover all the sub costs for all those, for any special education employee that are obviously out in the schools with our kids, but so that the schools don't have to budget for those.
And I didn't see that line. That was a big number, and I was like, going, is that dollars or those are? I got it now.
Yeah, it's hours.
That was.
Yes.
I didn't quite understand what that number was. That's a big number.
That is a big number.
That is exactly right there.
Does anyone else have any
I
questions?
think Charles had
Hi,
a question.
Charles.
Does this budget include any training for teachers
Yes.
to equip them to know about learning disabilities? I'm thinking of very modest types of things like tactile sensitivity, midline barrier issues, any of those kinds of things where the students are mainstream, they're in the classroom, but they may be falling behind because of their learning disability.
Yes, we do. So this year specifically, when we have our early release days, When school gets out early, we have all of our special needs assistants attend 2-hour trainings, and those are some of the things that we have gone over. We've trained to behavior issues, we've trained to learning disabilities, we've trained to just general how to set up a classroom for sensory issues. So yes, we do a lot of professional development. Sometimes what we're lucky enough is we already will have an employee. We have our own autism specialists, and some of our teachers are very skilled in working with specific learning disabilities. So sometimes we reach within and have those employees actually do the professional training for us to teach other employees. So yes, we do quite a bit of professional development.
So, do you also have a pull-out class for students that just can't be in, or the teacher recognizes they need them to be out of the classroom in order for the lesson to go on?
Yes, we do. So in every school in this district, we have what's called a learning resource center. And usually those are for kids that need some help, either need a space to go to, or they need help with academics, reading, writing, and math. Then we also have specialized classrooms throughout the district. One is called our structured learning program, which is for kids that need more emotional, social emotional support, behavior issues. We have a basic skills program, so those are kids that maybe have learning issues or other medical issues that might leave them 2 or 3 years behind their typical peers in academics. So they're running just at a little bit slower rate or pace. And then we also have a functional skills classroom. We have 2 of those, one elementary and one secondary at our middle school. And those are for our really heavily medically fragile students. So yes.
Are those services reflected in your budget?
Yes.
Or are they reflected, or are they also reflected in the school's budget?
They're a little bit of both. So in my budget, what you're gonna see are I paid for all of the employees and the subbing and some of the professional development, the technology for some of those folks. And then what you're gonna see in the building budget is they also, I mean, they're staff within those buildings. But we are trying to show that, especially a budget as large as mine, as many employees that work under special ed, how we allocate those out. So for example, Robert Frost School, they currently have a Learning Resource Center, they have an SLP, they have a basic skills, and they have a functional skills. They have every program that we offer in that building. So we have a lot of employees in that building, and we allocate extra funds to them, so those students are supported without taking away from their building funding.
I think it would be, are you experiencing a fairly sizable increase in the number of students that you need to serve in a given population?
Not in a particular given population. We have a steady increase over the last probably 5 or 6 years. We usually gain 15 to 17 students that are eligible for special education every year. So that can range anywhere from a student who's really medically fragile all the way to a student who maybe just needs some speech articulation help for a year. Not any one disability in particular is heavy in this district. It's pretty well spread out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dana, are we seeing, I remember hearing years ago, it might have been an offhand remark, but are we getting, do parents sometimes move to our district because we seem to do a pretty good job? Is that inflating them? Do we have inflated numbers, or is that just an offhand remark that doesn't bear out?
I don't think it's inflated. In the past, we have had parents specifically, research the district if they're moving to the valley and call and ask about our programs. I usually get 3 or 4 of those calls a year. And sometimes they end up moving here.
Okay.
I think we're just in an area that's beautiful and we're close to Portland, so we do get a lot of families that move here and they just happen to have kids with disabilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. So the other couple of pages there in the back, if you want to look at those, I have a worksheet there that basically looks at our core values that we currently have. And underneath each of those, I've just bulleted out what those looks like for special education, and in the orange print underneath those, kind of what areas of the budget those things pull from. So we're trying to always look at our core values and make sure, it should be in the very back, Jennifer, of that section. Is that right?
Yep.
In the special services section.
Dana's supplements are in the supplement
Oh, I'm
section
sorry.
in the back.
It looks like this. If you can sign this. So those are just how, you know, our budget dollars work and how we're supporting students, sorry, in relation to our core values. Another graph that I wanted to show you guys is, it says the estimated special education staff and student site supports. So kind of what Charles was asking, this shows you in graph form how many special ed students in each building, how many special needs assistants are in those buildings, and then how many special ed teachers. The ones with the asterisks are schools that have more than one of our special ed programs in them. So they might have a heavier amount of staff for those smaller, more needy classrooms. And then on the flip side of that, I just wanted to let you know, schools by primary disability. I know when I first started teaching here in the mid-2000s, it was kind of rare to have a lot of kids in special ed with more than like learning disabilities, sometimes out in our K-8s. We just didn't see a lot of that. I wanted you guys to see that on the right-hand side there, those are all the special ed diagnoses that the federal government recognizes. In each of our buildings, we have at least one student in 4 of those categories in each of our buildings in this district. So it's not that we have a lot more students, it's that they're in every building, which is awesome. Our goal in special education is to keep our students in their home school with their peers in their own communities. But it does show that it's like, it stretches us a little thin. Again, we have to get out to all those buildings with our specialists and our teachers and have enough support staff to make sure that they are successful. Does anyone have any other questions for me?
I just want to say thank you. You have a big job.
It's the best job.
I have a quick question for you, just really quick.
Yes.
Do you have, and I haven't looked at this really a lot because we just got it, but it'd be quicker if you could answer. Do you have a large percentage of students that need to go to a specific building for certain things? Or do you really try to just leave them there and have the specialists go out for sure?
We are really trying to keep kids in their home school.
So you're not finding that you have to make that transition of kids that need to?
Especially early on, we really want kindergarten kids to stay at their home school with their siblings where their families live instead of transferring across. And I have to give kudos to our administrative staff. I asked a lot of our principals. In some of those special cases, we have some kids in the district that really have their own what we call individual learning like areas. And that's, I know, difficult on some of our small buildings, and the administrators and general ed staff are rolling with it. It's been great.
Okay.
It's really been great.
Okay. I'm glad you haven't been forced to.
No.
And you don't feel like you're gonna be forced to make difficult decisions to remove kids from their home schools?
No, I mean, I think our
feeling good?
community does a really good job. You know, we just try and have really honest conversations with families.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely move a kid if everyone on the team really feels like that's the most beneficial for the student.
Right.
But
We're not
no, our
feeling-
number one is to keep them.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for just.
I have one more
feedback.
question.
Yes.
How do you have problems with teachers that want to place a student that they just don't feel is cooperating with them out of the special ed programs?
No, I mean, we have a really good internal process called our care team process. I mean, the data really does the talking. We have to look at the data, what the student can do, either academically or functionally or behaviorally, and we roll with that. So it's a huge team decision. Not really one person gets to make that decision. So, no, I really haven't run across that here.
The literature talks about the difficulties that your program has with students being placed in your program because they just aren't able to teach them.
Yeah, and I have to say that, you know, I think what's wonderful is that that type of thinking is really old school. We no longer work in a silo in special ed. Special ed, I always like to tell my staff and anyone that'll listen, is special ed is not a place, it's a service. And so we serve kids wherever they're at.
Thank you very much.
All right, Jennifer Hannon, Curriculum Assessment, Teaching and Learning.
Good evening.
And I assume yours is under district support?
Mine is, yes, under district support. And I will review the areas of curriculum and improvement of instruction. And then the rest of this sheet is Danny. So if we start under Object Code 420-100-180, that science curriculum line, that is that ongoing subscription for the science curriculum that we adopted 2 years ago. The next one, the SEL curriculum, there's a significant change there, just down to $1,500. That's because we purchased all of those classroom kits. This additional money is just for the blended classrooms. So the teachers who have blended classrooms have one grade level kit, and next year they'll get their second and or third grade level kit for their blended class. And then the big ticket item, of course, is the social studies adoption, which I don't want to say too much about because we have middle school and high school teachers that have worked really hard on that adoption and will be presenting to the board next month, and I don't want to steal their show. But the social studies standards for the state of Oregon have changed pretty significantly in this last round. And the current social studies curriculum in our district is about 14 to 19 years old, depending on the building and the grade level. So this will get us up to date with the new standards, and there are textbooks. Different schools have elected to do different numbers of those. So some schools just a few textbooks for kids to take home if they need to, and some classrooms a classroom set. Nobody has gone a textbook for every kid. This kind of adoption, it's a complete learning platform. It's a very different experience than a textbook. It really matches well with the way kids learn. It's a multimedia platform. So the teacher's very excited about it, but I'll let them give you a presentation about it. Then moving down to the next, improvement of instructional services. That went up, the staff release time and extra time for curriculum went up just a bit. That's attached to the teacher training that will have to happen for the new social studies adoption. So those teachers will have to be trained on how to use that amazing multimedia learning platform. And then workshops, we upped that just a bit this year because most of our workshops are covered now under the workshop grant requests, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and Title II, which is improvement of instructional services through federal funding. But we've noticed that some things come up sometimes through legislature that become Division 22 requirements that require us to train teachers on a specific topic immediately. Like Aaron's Law would be an example of that. There's one on the floor now around suicide prevention that would require some additional training. And then the STAR assessment program, that went up a bit, good and bad there. It's not great that it costs more, but it's great in that with a rededication to running data teams, our teachers are now really laser focused on where every kid is every 6 weeks with their skill development. There's some additional resources within that assessment program. Accelerated Math 2.0, you may have seen it come home with your children, or your children may have asked you to help them. I know I get that question several times a week. Or Accelerated Reader, which are online programs attached to that STAR assessment system that teachers can use to differentiate their instruction and assign kids targeted skill practice at their level. So that's the increase in that cost. And then supplies, that just more accurately went up just a bit. It just more accurately reflects some of the requests we've gotten. Again, with data teams and teachers tracking exactly where their kids are, I've gotten some requests that I have not gotten in my previous year in this job. Like, I teach 4th grade, but could you get me a set of the 3rd grade math materials for the teachers' versions? We've had a couple students move in not speaking any English at all, and they need the math textbooks in Spanish, just things like that. So, And then I'm going to steal one of Dandy's lines all the way down under instructional staff development. The professional development pool, that was new this school year, and it wasn't reflected in the 18-19 budget because it was a bargained item after budget committee, but it was there and we did utilize it this year. So that is a grant application for any teacher can go to any training, on virtually anything. They fill out how it connects to their teaching and what they hope to get out of it, what the student outcomes would be. And then it allows for $250 for a teacher to go do anything. And our teachers have used all of that this year. We've just run out. So 76 teachers were able to utilize that this year. And we only denied one, and that was just because it was to go do a training on a curriculum that's not our adopted curriculum. And we're close enough to the end of the year now that we're able to kick into, it will roll over again July 1st. So can you take that training after July 1st? And that has been working pretty well. And then most of our professional development funds still come out of Title II, which is not reflected in this budget. But those have to be targeted for the areas that our district, through our Title II needs assessment, identifies as our areas of need. So professional development under Title II has to fit within those areas. So this year, it was use of data to drive instruction, so anything under that, and then also in the social, emotional, and behavior. Technology seems to come up every year now. So our 3 areas this year were those 3. And I think just the teachers continue to feel like there's always a learning curve coming at them with technology. So that's, I think, will continue to be an area. I know you hear that there's always a learning curve with the behavior, the trauma, the social, emotional. So we continue to provide a lot of support in that area as well. That's all I have in my area, unless anyone has questions.
Just a minor one. You didn't mention this very minor increase in total hours student information specialist. What is that? That's.
I'll cover that.
Oh, you're covering that. I'm sorry.
I stole a line. I just stole one line from her area.
Got it.
Sorry, I confused the issue. But professional development is more. I run that professional development line item, even though it falls under HR because it's a contracted amount. So I wanted to.
I have a quick question for you. Did you happen to go over under instructional staff development, the staff release time and extra time?
Yes,
That's a significant difference. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, that's for the social studies training.
Oh,
For the
thank
new
you.
social studies
Okay.
adoption, there's that multimedia learning platform, and it's amazing, and teachers are going to love it, but it will be a little bit overwhelming the first time they look at it, so we want to give them a day, maybe a day and a half, to see what the company recommends, what the teachers feel like they need, but to spend time with the publisher to learn it, and then also have some time to practice it and start to plan their lessons with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, Andy Stevens up for personnel.
Thank you. I'm Andy Stevens, the Assistant Superintendent. I'm in charge of HR and personnel issues. So Jennifer and I kind of split the same budget worksheet and divide the categories out. So if you look at the top of the worksheet where it talks about staffing, Jonathan, I'll go ahead and answer your question. You'll note that the student information specialist went from a 0.4 to a 0.5, and that's because the person that had been in that position had several other duties that she was in charge of, and so when she went to work in the private sector and we rehired for her, we put the person back to 0.5, which has been very helpful because that's all the ODE reporting. That's the person that we need to make sure knows is on top of all of that reporting with ODEs, that we're getting the appropriate funding and giving the ODE the data they need so we're not in trouble. So that's that particular increase there. The rest just reflects the normal raise, inflation, and COLAs that Steve talked about earlier.
Does that include the curriculum director? It looks like it went from a 0.9 to a full 1.0. It's the third one down, curriculum director 0.9, and then the request for a 1.0.
Yeah, Jennifer's always been 1.0.
I was paid,
Oh.
.1 out of Title II
Okay.
previously,
Oh,
and
okay.
we've directed all those
Okay.
funds towards teachers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then if you look to about the middle of the budget worksheet, you'll see student safety and our school resource officer. There's a bit of an increase there to 95,000. That's, you know, our percentage of the salary and benefit increase because that is a PERS employee as well. He's employed by the city, but we pay for some of that service. And then the next section.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's still a 50-50 split, right, with the city?
It's not a 50-50 split. We pay for, what would it be?
75-25.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because we have him
That's right,
almost
okay.
10 months of the year, and then during vacation or breaks, and then summer, he goes back
Gotcha.
to the city. And then at the bottom of the budget worksheet, if you look at instructional staff development, Jennifer kind of already explained the difference from moving from the 20,000 to the 5,000. That line item in HR is used to help support teachers or classified staff members who might need some additional training in order to perform their essential job functions. And so we have a little bit of money set aside for that. The classified wages for August in service, so prior to this year, we just tried to absorb whatever that amount was. That is not a contract day for our classified people, so we have asked them to come back for half a day for the last 2 years so that they can be part of the team. The welcome message and the setting the tone for the school year, that's something that they had not been included in before. And so we piloted the last 2 years and they really appreciate that, so we're gonna budget for it. And they come at 7:30, they stay for the message and all of the activities and stay for lunch, and then they are free to go for the day. It's that page. And then if you go to the next page, the second page, the budget worksheet, you'll see transportation. There's a slight increase there, which is to be expected for reimbursement for different trips and routes. There it's kind of a minor increase. And then at the last section under staff services, if you look at Talent Ed, our online system, it's gone up about $1,000. That is our online application system. So that's how people are able to apply for jobs within the district. And then that's also the system we use for teacher observation and evaluation. And so it's a software system where teachers set their goals within this software. Principals can view it. They have kind of a dialogue electronically, and all of the forms are kept in there. And then at the end of the year, we hit a button and it prints out, and it's beautiful and it's all done. It saves quite a bit of paper. And the final piece is the events and luncheons that went up a bit. And so out of that fund comes the funding for our retirement dessert that we have, which is May 7th. I invite all of you to attend. That's coming up. And also any of our employees of the year when they get the plaques. And we also pay for a few tickets for them to attend the First Citizens Banquet. And then the luncheon on the first day that everybody's back, we split those costs with both the Classified and Licensed Association and the district office. So that needed to go up a little bit. I don't have a very exciting budget.
Any questions on the transportation?
Yes.
Is some of that reimbursed?
Yes, it's the specific trips that are educational related or transporting to and from school, we get reimbursed from the federal government 70%. Is that right, Steve?
What's that?
70% on the federal reimbursement for the transportation costs.
It's part of the state school fund,
State school
on that
fund,
revenue
yeah.
page,
Yeah.
state transportation grant, yeah, we're reimbursed 70% of that,
Yeah.
that cost, yeah.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, can
Yes.
you back on the
Yes.
on the first page, instructional, I think Jennifer talked about something else that I asked. I think she was
Okay.
looking at her instructional staff development 2240, staff release time and extra time. Is that yours? Was that
Well,
Jennifer's?
it's mine in the sense that it's part of the collective bargaining agreement, so it's a bargaining
okay.
item. That's what
Okay.
she meant by the contract. But then she oversees the grant application because it's more aligned. Those activities are supposed to be aligned with teachers' goals as well as the goals of the building of the district.
Right.
For instruction.
Okay, so
We kind of
it's,
split it.
okay. So it went from 20,000 and you're only requesting 5,000?
Correct, because for my portion of what I'm responsible for providing support in, it's more in relation to employees who might need more assistance in performing their job because they maybe are falling a little bit short or they need some help. So sometimes maybe I would need to send maybe sending a secretary to a customer service training.
Okay,
Or-
so did you have more of that in prior years than you're requesting now then?
I used to have the 20,000, I never used that much, and so what we would do is like, do you have teachers that need conference money? Because I've got
Oh,
this
so
money.
you found that you just didn't use
Yeah, so
the
we
full
put it
requested
in the,
amount.
when we bargained to have this workshop fund, like, well, I have money,
Plenty of.
so let's just use
Oh,
it that way.
I see, okay, thank you, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you just didn't use it, okay.
Any other questions for Dandy? All right, thanks, Dandy. All right, Lauren Stanley, Facilities and Maintenance.
Good evening. I'm Warren Stanley, I'm Facilities Director. I'll start out by addressing the question that Charles had pertaining to the current facilities assessment. You'd asked the question if the facility assessment was directed. The answer to that is yes. I've actually walked through with the architects that we hired to do that facility assessment. I've been through almost every room in the district, quite honestly, in that process to make sure that it's as comprehensive as possible and that we're looking at everything that needs to be on the list for meetings. So that was, I believe, one of your questions.
So that is to say that all of the existing facilities have been addressed, but consideration of a new facility, is that addressed?
Well, the way the assessment is set up, first of all, we got a TAP grant through Oregon Department of Education. They have a specific system that you use. It's a template spreadsheet that the architects are required to use. There will be, when it's all said and done, they will have line items for all of the deficiencies, but there will also be a replacement cost estimate in there too. So you will actually compare the deficiency, the amount that it will take to correct the deficiencies in the building, as well as a potential replacement cost. And so that will be part of the assessment. Now, the plan is to make it as comprehensive as possible. We want to catch everything that these buildings need. And then we will put together a facilities committee to determine what the long-range facility plan looks like. That committee will have the ability to basically determine what we decide to do, whether that would be potential for replacement or whether we want to fix our existing buildings and what things do we want to do. So that's all negotiable in that process. So it's basically what the community wants, and I think that's what's important, is that they have the ability to have all the information in that facilities assessment to make educated decision on what to do. So, does that make sense? And the other question you had also asked was pertaining to the per student allocation for maintenance. And as Steve shared, that's going to be really challenging to do because there's such a variance. What we have is we have a significant list of deferred maintenance for all the buildings, quite honestly. And we're trying to take care of the things that are the worst. So the worst siding areas that are potentially going to leak this year if we don't hit them. So those will be prioritized, and some of the other ones will be deferred until the following year. So some years you might see a bunch of money spent on one building, and then the next year hardly anything. So if you really wanted to look at that, I guess the easiest way to do it would be on a district level, I think, to figure out, and you'd have an average, what it's costing to maintain the district per student. But I think it'd be really, really difficult and challenging to try and break out a building and say, well, this building is costing us more per student, because on any given year, that's gonna change. This is the third budget that I've had the opportunity to put together since I've been here. So there's been increases each year. Andy's been very supportive in knowing that there's a lot of work to do in the district, and so That's what we're trying to do. So my mission is basically to provide safe and healthy, comfortable facilities for our students, staff, and community in direct support of the district mission. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to take a look at the district maintenance budget. And there's one very significant request that you'll find under personnel. I feel this will have a significant impact on the facility department's ability to provide the consistent customer service deserved by our students and staff. This request is for an additional supervisory position in the way of a maintenance supervisor. The workload in this district is such that the facilities team is just not able to keep up despite our best efforts, and we're in need of an additional team member. As Andy shared, we have a lot of very old facilities. There's a lot of challenges with these facilities when you go out to troubleshoot and find problems because we don't have prints for a lot of them. So everything takes longer to troubleshoot and correct. Due to that and the fact that we've had a very high project load since I got here, with increases in the budget, etc., I just have not been able to keep up, and my facilities team has not been able to keep up, and so that is a request that I put out there for you. So, is there any additional questions on that?
I think I just have a general question because I don't think I yet understand. What would this person do exactly?
So this person basically would work under my direction. They would do a lot of the, it'd be a working supervisory position. So they would also be working on things like doors, door repairs, a whole variety of things. Right now, basically, some of the things that I'm doing that are challenging, that pull me away from the other things, like public water systems operating. We have wells at most of our schools. Those are very time consuming to do all of the monitoring that is necessary to make sure that we're providing safe water. There's plans involved with that need to be revised also, emergency plans, call for and testing plans, etc. So I'm also the district locksmith. So we just finished basically rekeying all of the schools in the district with the exception of the high school. While a lot of those cylinders I was able to get key free from the factory, a lot of them I've done the actual painting of the cylinders, and I do a lot of the troubleshooting of the hardware, etc. So this person would basically work under my direction and take a lot of these duties off of my hands so that I can deal with other things like the vast list of projects, the other things that we've got going on. I mean, we've had 5 seismic projects, the transition to the middle school. It's just kind of been a very, very busy, fast-paced project. And I mean, I hate to ask for this, honestly. I worked in a larger district for 14 years and I didn't have any assistance at all. But the workload is what it is here. There's a lot of things that need to be done and I just can't keep up. So that's fine.
On the maintenance specialist, how would this person complement? I'm just new at what it.
So the facility maintenance specialist is basically our secretary. She performs a lot of other duties also. But it's primarily provides secretarial support for the facility supervisor and myself.
Lauren, if I could chime in, the only other thing that I would add, which is part of the reason why I support this addition, is the compliance requirements for new mandates dictated by the state board. And we've all read the papers about lead and water testing. We have, well, we're already on it with the radon testing and monitoring within the school district. We are also doing a pretty massive project right now to replace all of the ballots containing what's it called? PCBs. Which again, another abatement issue, and asbestos is an ongoing, and it is not going away anytime soon. Our buildings are filled with them, and having somebody to help with some of those mandates, I think is going to make a huge difference in my mind.
Do we contract for those services, or do we perform them personally?
Some of them we perform, and to a certain extent, we can do certain things, like the asbestos. We have a couple staff that are trained in-house, that are able to do small amounts of asbestos abatement, but they're limited to basically 3 square feet. And really, we use them for very minimal stuff. Other than that, we have to hire a contractor.
So water quality, all those issues are,
So one of the other challenges is, so we have a custodial maintenance 3-person who's been in the district for quite some time, and he is getting ready to retire. So he has basically got his box packed. And we have had a challenge and not been able to fill that particular job description. I requested an additional custodial maintenance 3 in current year budget to be able to work with him and gain some of that knowledge. And we posted that position, and we were not able to get anybody that met the minimum qualifications of the position. So unfortunately, it requires a limited mechanical electrical license, and anybody that's got a limited mechanical electrical license in this current labor market is making good money working for an electrical contractor. So that's one of the challenges. So.
I have a couple questions for you real quick. The custodial staff at Robert Frost, there's kind of a weird, you had for 2017-18, 148,821, then for 18-19, 107, 753, and then back up to 148,840, and the FTE didn't change for the staff. Is that just maybe a typo or something, or?
So,
I just found it kind of funny that it.
Well, I can tell you that we did have a person that retired, that was at the top of the scale, and so that was
okay.
a lot for the drop, and then I
Okay.
think the increase would probably a lot for additional pay scale changes. Now, I'm not positive, and I might have to refer to Steve if he has any additional information on why that might be.
Yeah, the drop seems to be too much there. I'd have to go
Right.
back. And
I thought it was just
Yeah.
kind of weird, and I thought, well,
Yeah.
maybe there needs
Good-
to be a 4,
good catch,
147.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
that.
Do some checking.
This is a little bit of a branch out. We recently have, there was a committee that brought an idea to potentially convert or change Mark Twain and Robert Frost School to a K-5. Robert Frost K-5, Mark Twain K-5. In your knowledge of those buildings, is there going to be, or do you think there, what kind of money are we looking at? Is that going to be a significant, that you're going to request maybe for next year? I'm just kind of.
I really have to do a full assessment of what that
okay.
looks like.
Okay.
But honestly, those are both elementary school. I mean, Mark Twain was a middle school, but we already made conversions to it.
Right.
And we moved the smaller students into the restrooms.
Right.
Which is typically one of the locations where you end up having to make modifications to
Right.
accommodate the smallest kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot
A
that
whole
would
lot?
change.
Okay.
But once again, I would want to do
Yeah.
a thorough check and make
Okay.
sure that I'm not missing.
Just
something.
planting the seed,
Mhm.
just kind of.
Yep, I'm aware of that discussion,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, great, awesome. Thank you.
Yes,
is that
absolutely.
the kind of question your building assessment is going to address?
It will not, it would not address that particularly. It's more addressing deficiencies. So it'll address things like old doors that are rusting out. It'll address things like water intrusion through foundations, roofing systems that are at the end of their usable life that are failing, siding systems, basically everything, to flooring, to some of the other big things that they will address is ADA. A lot of our buildings have very limited ADA access, so that's something that would be addressed in the facility assessment too, and what it will take to make those buildings fully accessible. So it's pretty comprehensive. The one challenge I'm finding is I got a draft, I started to review it, and I'm finding that the pricing that was input by ODE. It was done over 3 years ago, and so it's looking pretty low from some of the stuff that I'm seeing. So I'm going to be working with the architects, going through this, and we want to make sure everything is as accurate as possible before we put it out there.
Did you say a date of completion of your assessment? Did you give kind of a time frame?
I have a draft copy, and once again, it's on my list of things to,
Sure.
I need some significant dedicated time to sit down and go through that and make a lot of notes, and then meet with the architects and go through and make sure that we make the changes. I mean, I immediately saw some things that they missed when I started looking through it, and noticed, like I said, that there's some issues with some of the costs that we need to get addressed. Okay. Okay. So. Okay, so we got that covered. The other line item we see under 2546, 329 is annual fire alarm system testing. There's an addition there.
I had that
so-
starred.
All three, so do I.
Was that not
So-
annual before?
All three of them.
So the district, for about the past 5 years, in order to save funds and costs, they had some staff that were trained that had been performing the fire alarm system testing. In recent walkthroughs, we're also in the process of doing full fire marshal inspections of all the facilities currently, and he has addressed to me that he is pretty much mandating that we have a contractor perform those services, so, based on what he's. So that's why I added that. So it's something we haven't been doing. We've been using our in-house staff. At the same time, one of those trained people will be retiring in June, so it's just one of those things that need to be added to the list. So. Many of the buildings are going to see line items for strategic siding replacement. You know, this is something we're probably going to continue to see. What I try to do is find, like I was saying, the first areas, or the worst areas, and attend to those areas first to prevent water from coming into the building. But that we'll do a wall or an area this year, and there's still 2 more left to come in the coming years. So, so you're going to see that line item for a little while at multiple locations. It also includes windows. So there's a couple items that you're gonna see that were budgeted for in current year budget that I've had to re-budget for. And a couple of those are pertaining to door replacements. We have sets of doors up at Victor Point and the middle school. So with the middle school, I have been trying all year to get a contractor to be able to replace those doors. I've worked with 5 different contractors, and I've gotten some pretty crazy bids. The last one was basically 3 times what I had budgeted for $58,000 to replace 3 sets of doors. So I'm kind of back to the drawing board. I've reached out to another contractor, but I'm at the time now where with lead time being 6 to 8 weeks, because these are the ones at Victor Point in particular are going to be special order, because those are narrower openings, so they're not 3-foot doors, they're not just a standard 307 door. So if I can't get somebody on board to do these quickly, it's going to be next year. And so I increased the budgeted amount in order to make sure that we can get those done. And I don't know, I can go through all of the projects in here if you'd like, or I can just allow you to ask me any questions on any of those general fund projects.
One thing I would find helpful is for each of the schools, I mean, there's sort of your boilerplate, you know, electrical and garbage and fuel. And then there's the special ones in bold, which is really handy. It'd be handy-er to me if I could see the totals of both sort of separated out, right? So you've sort of got your deferred maintenance budget, which is all these bold things more or less, right? And then you've got your operational costs, which are gonna be essentially the same year over year with modest increases for inflation. And it would just be, as I'm looking at it, I realized that I wasn't really able to quickly ascertain, what are we spending on deferred maintenance? I can't tell by looking.
And I'm gonna have to apologize, normally I do have a separate spreadsheet that lists just the projects and it totals up the projects and what funding source, et cetera. I did not get that submitted and I didn't share it with you. But normally I do prefer to have that so that you can just see just the projects and what they are and what those totals are. So I apologize for that. So, if you want me to break something out, I'd be happy to break something out and get that information out to you. It's pretty easy.
I won't speak for everybody else. I would find that valuable, so.
Okay. Okay, it's basically pretty much done. It's just a matter of cleaning it up a little bit. So there's a couple other projects that are out there in the process. One of them, as Steve mentioned, the Central Howell Gymnasium roof. That is a project that we're going to do out of capital improvement funds. That roof is an old built-up roof, and middle cap sheeting. The capping is mostly gone. There's actually 2 layers, and there's nails coming up from the original layer through the other layer, and so it's got wet patch over about 50 to 60% of the roof, and it's got to be replaced. We were very fortunate on this one. We had it tested, and it was not asbestos containing. Otherwise, our cost would have been up significantly. And as we also have 2 seismic rehabilitation projects. As Andy had mentioned, we have one at Silverton Middle School on the gym building. We've been working on that one. It originally came in way over budget, so we've been working on value engineering and re-engineering that whole project in order to try and get it within the budgeted grant funding that is available. And we are very close, but we're still working on some additional value engineering at this point to make sure that we can get within budget. Subsequently, we're putting aside some funds for that one, and the Mark Twain project, which we're also doing the same thing, trying to value engineer it within the allocated funding source. So we're setting aside some money in the state facilities grant funds, I believe, in order to cover contingency for overage on that. But once again, we are still working on trying to get it within budget. We just don't know if we're going to make it all the way there. These are very important projects. The middle school was supposed to happen last year, so we weren't able to do it, so we really need to make sure we get this complete. Other than that, the other big project we're working on really that's not, it's not really going to be a budget issue. It's hopefully going to be budget neutral. It's an energy efficiency project. And basically we're looking at using energy savings performance contractor to try and get all of the aging lighting replaced in the district and all upgraded to LEDs. So that is a project that we're going to leverage Senate Bill 1149 funds, which we have for energy efficiency projects, Energy Trust of Oregon, energy savings or projected energy savings, and be able to utilize those funds towards this project and get a lot of this lighting in place.
Any other questions for Lauren?
I have some questions for you.
Okay.
On page 2, number 2543, that function 2543, it says ground supplies. There's a significant rate, yeah, on page 2. Under page 2. And then on the left, the number is 2543.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
sorry.
That's okay, ground
Yes.
supplies. You have a significant increase in that. What,
So, basically, we're trying to cover some of the additional costs and trying to start to do more groundwork and improvements. So, I'm trying to build that budget also. There's a variety of things that go in there, such as fertilizer, broadleaf spray, Roundup, etc. Initially, as you can see, there wasn't very much. $10,000 is really not much. To be quite honest, One of the issues that we found, we did some soil testing on the fields. We found that the fields were, in some cases, let's see, the new high school field is like 5.2 pH. So it's so low that it can't absorb the nutrients, so you can pour fertilizer on it, doesn't do any good. So it cost us like $9,000 to have lime spread on the fields of both complexes in order to make the fertilizer actually work. So as you can see, that's just that, and then you look at fertilizing 4 to 6 times a year. We were contracting that out. I'm trying to get our staff to do more of that. We're going to purchase the product, but this is something that they have not been doing, and so there's a little bit of a learning process, but I know it's going to work out much better us doing it ourselves. Still, you've got a variety of things going there. Anywhere that we were to put bark chips, bark dust around the high school.
Well, you have 2540, just 2 rows up, wood chips, all schools.
Now that's playground chips.
Oh, playground, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's just a separate line item that we keep that kind
Great,
of broken
yeah,
out so that
yep.
we can keep tabs on it.
Nice, okay. And then I have one more question for you. Does the city of Silverton give about $25,000 to $30,000 for fields to the district for you to use?
I believe that there is some funds that are given to the district.
Okay.
I'm not sure the exact amount,
Okay.
but that sounds pretty close. I wanted to say 20.
Yeah, it's a $20,000 grant we receive from the city of Silverton annually for maintenance of green space within the city of Silverton.
I'm sorry.
For schools within the city of Silverton. So we're not allowed to use that money at Silvercrest or Scotts Mills or other locations, since it's specific to support the city of Silverton green space.
I'm sorry, so you get $20,000 grant annually that the district uses for the city of, for the town
No,
of
it's
Silverton?
for our green space on our schools, to support the green space on our
Oh,
schools.
okay.
It's called a green space, annual green space grant from the city of Silverton, because the city acknowledges that the
Right.
schools are essentially the parks and recreation for the city, and so they offer some concession for that.
Oh, I see, okay, all right. And where does that money go?
It's really a revenue
Specifically.
stream that helps offset these costs.
Some of these costs?
But
Okay.
the agreement with the city is that the funds are to be used for things like fertilizer and mowing and lime application, things of that sort to help maintain the green space.
That's
Okay.
actually received, tracked, and then spent out of Fund 270 because it's a special revenue source.
Okay,
So it doesn't show up in Lauren's budget anywhere, is what I.
it did, right, okay. Okay,
No.
thank you, thanks.
Any other questions for Lauren?
What is the fuel cost at Robert Frost? Is it natural gas going down? It just has a substantial decrease while others are like I'm just on like fuel, liquid fuel.
Great, let me take a quick look. So typically what we do is we look at the last 3 years of what it's cost for operation, and then where we're at in current year. And then we basically look at any cost increases that might be coming. So, so obviously, we've not been using as much fuel over there.
I mean, it looks like some of in the city, there's a drop in it was the price of natural gas or how those were fired, but others were staying stable, so I just was wondering that's a pretty, year after year, pretty steady drop.
Yeah, that is a significant drop.
Next year will be free.
And,
I'd like to know a heating system.
yeah, so that heating system has 2 condensing boilers, and then it has air handlers throughout the
But yeah,
area.
there's no upgrade or anything.
So,
to
no,
it.
I have not done anything as far as an update at that location.
I have a question. First of all, you're to be congratulated on your energy savings program. I know that the city is about to approve a energy plan for the city, and it includes some of the recommendations that you're already implementing. So, congratulations on that.
We hope to implement those, I should say. We'll probably bring this to the board in May. when we get some better numbers. We're still trying to work it all out.
Yeah.
So.
The other question is, I'm really a little ignorant on how we deal with our food services. And you have several items in here to upgrade dishwashers and refrigeration and so on, and I just don't know if those services are catered, or do we actually require a kitchen component?
These are our kitchens, these are our components, and yes, so we operate these kitchens and prepare food, and these are necessary items.
For what purpose?
The dishwashers?
Well, no, I mean, what are the kitchens used for? For what purpose are they used for, if we have a food service?
Well, our kitchens are used to prepare food, so they're full operating kitchens, at least at the sites, at several of the sites. There are a few that are not. The smaller schools, such as Evergreen and Prattham, I don't believe have operational commercial kitchens, but these schools do.
My question is, are we employing food services to bring food to the children for lunch?
So
Lauren, I'll go ahead and answer that. We do have contracted services, Charles, for management of our food service programs, but we use each one of our kitchens, and we own those kitchens. So for all of the food preparation, even though it's a contracted service for management, all of the food preparation happens within our kitchens. So we're responsible for upgrading those as needed when replacement equipment or items or other improvements are needed.
So when we're paying the contract fee for the food, part of the cost of the food is not being borne by the food provider. The district is paying for that by maintaining a kitchen and upgrading the equipment in that kitchen so that those services can be provided under contract.
Correct. Correct.
Well, I would add that the kitchens are used other times too.
Right.
You know, if there's an event at the school or something like that too.
Absolutely. And the way we have to look at it, Charles, is if, let's say, the board had a very good discussion the other night about food service, and if we were to ever assume it back in-house again, the management, again, would just land back on the shoulders of the school district. Right now, it's only the management of food services that is contracted. We're the landlord. We own it. We have to maintain it. They come in and provide the management for food services. Okay.
Any other questions for Lauren? Okay, thanks, Lauren, appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to bring something up in interest of what Tom brought up earlier about our timing here. It is 10 o'clock. And I know we have two folks left on our presentation scheduled for tonight. I also think it's appropriate that we leave time for public comment tonight as well, since we do have some of our patrons here from the district. So wanted to throw it out to say, should we look to maybe move Steve and Andy to the next meeting in terms of presentation to allow for our public comment? And that way we can wrap up in a timely fashion tonight for this first meeting. So I'll put
I
that out
would
there.
agree to that.
I like that.
It's a good idea.
The public came and they stayed, and if they'd like to say something, I'd like to support that.
Are we all in consensus of that? Not hearing any nays on that? Okay, great. All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask, would it be possible for us when we meet the next time to have some kind of an audio system? I know that when I go to city council, for example, I have a very difficult time if I'm in the audience hearing a speaker sitting at the table talking to us. And so I'm wondering if the community participation portion of our proceedings is really going to be very effective. They can't hear what we're talking about.
That's fair. Is there something maybe, Andy, we could bring in, Drew and his team could set up that we could do some more amplification for the next meeting?
Yes, we can, and we're happy to do that, of course. It's when we've held meetings here in the past, we've noted that in some cases the amplification system is not used. In other words, the acoustics in here are fairly good, and so, but we'd be happy to provide that. I just remember in the past when we've been able to, I can't provide 14 microphones what we can provide 2 or 3. And the budget committee and other meetings in the past have chosen just not to use those because it's very difficult to do that. So people have just generally spoken up or whatever it may be. But if you as the budget committee would like to do that, absolutely. We'll have an audio system, amplification system ready for the next
Or it
meeting.
sounds like maybe from the presenter,
Yeah, we're getting direct, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting, I
They're
think
not.
it's the public you're saying, Charles, is maybe from them talking to us to be able to amplify that back out to our
I think they can
public.
hear what we're saying,
Yeah,
but
just
not what
there.
the speaker-
Yeah, so maybe just there, Andy, might be a good implementation.
Okay.
So everybody can hear.
I see
I
the head
just
nod
want to
from
say
Drew.
that there was a successful time that we did use microphones that were shared
Yeah.
at our board meeting, joint city council meeting at the middle school. And I think it seemed to help quite a bit when someone had something to say, they just picked up the microphone that was closest to them and
Sure.
either asked their question or made their comment. So it really was a successful endeavor that they did, so it worked well.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Aaron, can we get, is it possible just to get like just a quick input from the audience? Are they, can
Yeah,
they hear
I-
us okay and not the person?
Can you hear us okay, or? Okay.
It would be nice if there was a microphone.
Okay,
For everybody.
thank you. And you're in the back, so you're most affected, so thank you. Yep, okay, thank you.
For public consumption later, I think it's gonna be really hard to hear on the recording.
Right. Well, there's a master mic down here, so, but yeah, that's a part of it, and Drew and his team's monitoring it, so that was something they can work on. But yeah, so let's look for that for next meeting. So in lieu of that, I would like to open this up for public comment for anybody who'd like to come and, based on what you've heard tonight, share your thoughts with us. Okay. Is there anybody tonight? Okay. I seeing none.
We cut Andy and Steve off for you guys.
Yeah.
Seeing we have it, I won't need to read this. The next thing would be establish our dates and times for subsequent meetings if needed. Obviously, we do need that. Our next scheduled meeting, Andy, refresh me. May 2nd.
May 2nd,
Okay.
yes, on the bottom of the agenda.
Sorry, I missed that.
That's right.
Okay, same place here, May 2nd, 7 PM.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a suggestion, and knowing that we have now 2 additional agenda items for the next meeting, that's when principals will present their budget worksheets. Would the budget committee consider beginning the meeting, let's say as early as 6, given the consideration of the late time and the likelihood that it will happen again on the 2nd? I just throw that to you as a suggestion, but we'll follow your lead.
That's a good point. What does everybody think about that, to give us a little more leeway for discussion? Would that be amenable to
I
everybody?
would encourage it.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah,
To
I
start at
agree.
6 p.m.
Yeah, I agree with you. Any other input, Charles?
Well, last year, we were presented with a budget and asked to approve it. That was the first time that we had seen the entire budget. And I don't know what our process is going to be this year, but if there were suggestions on either line items in the budget or some aspects of the budget from the committee, when would that time occur? And how much time would we give the staff or the board to consider those recommendations? Is it going to be a 5-minute decision-making process? Is it going to be a fait accompli as it was last year? What is it going to be?
Good question.
I think didn't you leave room in the process that if we think that we do need additional time, that we can decide that?
There's always time to schedule another meeting after May 2nd if the budget committee feels that's a need. Taking into account the suggestion that Charles made, though, you have received the full district budget tonight as compared to the last meeting, so you'll have a month to be able to look over that. Admittedly, the worksheets coming from the principals will be distributed the week prior, as we did this time with the department sheets. And there will be a time in the next meeting for discussion, and if during that discussion time you believe there's a need for another meeting to have more dialogue and more input, then you as a budget committee would have that authority to ask for that.
And I think those adjustments are, line item or by exception, right? If there's something that's glaring that we need to sit and discuss on a certain line item that's been presented to us, I think we can give ourselves leeway at the next meeting to do that. So yes, so I think that supports even more the 6 p.m. start time for next meeting. So I won't cast a vote, but I think we're on consensus of that one, that we'll start at 6 p.m. on May 2nd for the next meeting.
And can an extra effort be made for public notification? Like we go a little above the norm just because of the kind of the standard hardwired time of 7 p.m. in folks' minds?
Yes, when we make changes like that at the board level, we'll apply the same rule. We put it on the website, we put it out on social media, and we use correspondence.
I was just hoping that maybe a little extra, just go a slight bit above and beyond, because you are changing from what most people already have on their calendar and may not be checking in on the various normal modes of communication. I speak for myself personally that I would have it on my calendar and I would probably show up at 7 o'clock. Honestly, that's what I would do if I wasn't sitting here on the meeting or in the audience. So I just would hope that since you're making that change, you'd go a little extra to get the
Absolutely.
word out.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, so we're in consensus, May 2nd at 6 p.m. All right. Any other discussion items for this evening based on what we've heard so far?
Mr. Chairman, the discussion, we had a brief discussion about the allocation. We sort of moved past it with I think the idea that we might talk about it some more, but I don't know if there's a plan in place to do that or if there is no need to do that, and I'd like to know before I leave tonight.
The allocation, the 1.1 versus 1.05?
Well, there was a couple of questions that came up, and my recollection was that we said that needed further discussion and we moved on, but I don't know when or if there's a plan to do that, so I'm just asking if that's going to be a specific agenda item, or is it something that gets addressed? I don't know, I was just curious.
I have it on my list to talk, bring it up at a board meeting. The funding factor, I think, was that question. And so if we decide as a board that we wanted to explore that further in a work session, I think that we can do that.
And that's probably more appropriate at this, but it's more of a board function than anything. So
That would take some work from administration.
That would take some significant time to be able to evaluate that, and very likely bring somebody in to help support that process. Jonathan, is my sense. I'm just recalling the process from a number of years ago, and I believe at the time that the school district had a consultant come in and spent significant hours in the school district, just everything from identifying the models of funding distribution, how it works, how it's spent, how each of the grade configurations of, so just a variety of things were put into that process. So we're happy to do that, of course, and I do agree with Jennifer. I think it would be a very good board discussion, and Steve and I can surely be prepared for that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be fine. I just was.
Yeah. Would the reports from back when it was done still be available, and we could just understand the methodology and the thought processes behind why?
Boy, I have no idea.
Well, that way we don't have to rehire, but the idea that here was the thinking back then. Sure. And that might answer some questions. I don't know if Jonathan knows that.
Yeah, no, for me it's a curiosity.
Yeah, okay.
We can dust off a couple old files and see what we can find.
I don't want to hire a consultant, but I'm curious.
Right.
Yeah. So, good luck. Look in the back room under the boxes.
Debbie's pretty good at that.
Call Craig.
Yeah, Shelley.
We call Craig.
Craig
might be able to help.
Go ahead, Shelley and then Jennifer.
Yeah, so I just had one more question for Steve that I had some community members just say, oh, I'm wondering about this and I'm wondering about that. And I think the one thing that, and I want to get your opinion on it or maybe something to move forward with, is, for example, specifically how the sports teams are funded. Specifically, do we get money from Nike? Specifically, do we get funds and grants from somewhere to fund arts? Do we, so it's not readily like you can actually read it in a budget. How would someone from the community go about getting that very specific information, call you or come in and make an appointment and sit down and talk?
Yeah, both of those would be
Is that-
fine. I think there's information that will be presented in the high school budget. There's a
Okay.
main high school budget as well as the co-curricular budget that
Right.
specifically lines out every sport, but not all of the athletic, I mean, there's a co-curricular budget, but not all of it goes to the general fund. There's agency accounts, 270 fund accounts for all the different teams and activities and that take place throughout the school and all the schools for that matter. So
Right.
so there's a couple of different funds that deal with those things, but yeah. So I think there's information that could be gleaned from the budget report specifically
Right.
and through the presentation, but to dig deeper, it might warrant a conversation or a request for more information.
Okay, all right.
Steve, is that
Thank
true of
you.
the 98 money?
What's that?
The specific allocation to teaching functions?
Well, Measure 98 money is budgeted within Fund 200 grants and projects because it's a special revenue fund that has to be used a specific way.
And as I read the 98 language, it would permit funding a course in something like the band. Do we allocate monies out of 98 for the band?
We do not.
No, I'm not certain that's a designated use based upon the law, Charles. I mean, we surely dig that up for you, but is that
The
accurate?
three areas that we're allowed to spend, and the high school success money, which was formerly known as Measure 98, are dropout prevention, college and career readiness, and CTE.
CTE has a performing arts.
I think reading that
We
language
don't have a
carefully
program
would
here.
be useful, but I'd like to hear about it in the next meeting that we have. Just how we make a decision on spending those special funds. I don't know what decisions, I don't know how your decision-making process occurs. I mean, for example, you referred me to the strategic plan that we had last time, and we're now operating from in this budget, as opposed to the work that we did with community values this year, which will apply to the next 5-year budgets. I did not see a lot of specificity in that 5-year plan that you presented to us tonight. Unlike the specificity that was in the report of the proceedings that went on with the 200 people involved in the community values study, portion of the study. So that's why I asked the question, who in fact prepares the plan? I understand your answer to say a lot of parents, a lot of teachers, a lot of administrators, but somebody sits down in a room and prepares that plan. And somebody did that for the plan we have before us tonight. It does not include the specificity of the report from the process of 200 people that went through those meetings. So I'm wondering how we allocate our budget based on the community values portion of our plan.
Well, there were 2 or 3 questions there, Charles. One of them was who develops the plan, and that answer is the school board ultimately approves it. I'm going to start there and move backwards. The school board approves it based upon reports from the strategic planning leadership team that has presented 2 or 3 times to the school board since the beginning of this year, using this year as an example. We followed a very similar process 5 years ago. That strategic plan is also put in front of the public for public input at school board meetings as well. Going back even further within that process, the leadership team, which is a representative team of school and community members, takes the public information and puts it into the form of the mission, the vision, the core values, and even specific metrics that to this point, about 2/3 of that information has been presented to the board. The final presentation will be made to the board next month for additional public input and consideration before the board is asked to take action. So that's an overview of the process, and that the strategic planning leadership team is the one who is doing all the nuts and bolts work with that and coming up with what they believe to be the interpretive values or the values that the public has asked. That's then submitted to the board for their review, discussion, additional public input before a final vote is taken.
Who creates the team?
The team is developed through efforts by the consultant and by me, cabinet discussion, and we put that team together. We rely heavily upon the consultant to help form that team.
So would it be fair to say that the team is largely made up of administrative personnel?
Educators, yes.
So when the report is given to the board for approval, as it was in 5 years ago, it doesn't specify a lot of recommendations that may have been made at that time by the larger community.
Well, like,
It does, Charles. I mean, it captures it in a...
Can I jump, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's a visioning statement. It's not a technical one.
No, I understand that.
And you're wanting real specificity.
No, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for the document which we are asked to comply with. Does it reflect the recommendations of the broader community, or does it just reflect the recommendations of the appointed team?
It reflects the broader community because of the focus groups that met across the district. All of that information was compiled, and the summary is a result of all that.
So
It's
when
the
we
whole
see-
community, it's the teachers, it's everybody.
So when we see the report in a month, as Andy indicates we may, we will see something from the report that we got from the process that the community was involved in.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Charles, I'll speak to that because I'm on the committee. We've spent hours, months, exhausting the community input, painstaking hours of making sure that we're listening, as well as the administrators, superintendent. Lauren's part of the committee, Kevin's part of the committee, Leslie's part of the committee. This is a lots of folks on this committee that lots of eyes on to make sure that we are adequately listening to the community in terms of our core values and our mission and why is Silver Falls School District here.
I agree with
So
that, and
what
I'm
you see in
very
this
impressed with
report,
that process.
what you see in this report here next month will be months and hours of taking that and pulling the main themes with the help of our consultant, who's been invaluable, to keep us making sure we're pulling the right values out, the right things for our community.
I really like your statement, thank you. My concern, or not, maybe not a concern, but my question really is, since the document we're asked to operate from does not include a lot of the value statement that I see in the report from this year's process, is that to be expected in this year's final plan for the next 5 years? Or are we going to get more specificity and explanation of what values were brought to that process? Because it was a broad one, we got a lot of different values, we got a lot of fairly common.
I think we're operating under this current
right.
strategic value.
Okay, so let me explain this.
Yeah,
He wants the back information of how, of everything that you talked about or that you worked on, and the language, and how you, what language, why did you pick certain language to go in a certain direction and delete some of the other language? Do you see what I mean? Or ideas?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So that's what he's wanting to.
On the current one, or I'm confused here, on the current or the existing?
No, it's gonna be, well, it's not on the
upcoming.
current one, the upcoming one. Yeah,
And I
because
don't
he
think it
wants
has
to
some bearing
see.
on our budget right
Yeah.
now, though.
This is the
This
parking
is the
lot.
one
This
we're
is the
working
parking
on.
Yeah, this is a
lot.
parking lot
So-
thing.
So-
I think we
Right,
might
I
be
know.
going too down a rabbit trail.
From
Yeah,
the statement,
and I'm
I
just
see
trying to
some very
explain to you what
broad
he wants.
values.
Yeah, I know.
So-
I don't see any community values. in it.
Right, I think, but I think we gotta pull that back
So-
to your point, Shelley, is to the parking lot. This is kind of going down a little, hate to use the rabbit trail, but for tonight, and for what we need to do as a budget committee, this is our document. This is our
Okay.
guiding principle.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so what he's saying is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what he's saying is the budget that we are talking about right now is going to reflect the current strategic visioning plan.
Mhm.
But why are we passing a budget that's that's going to be on an old strategic plan when a new one is going to be here in a month?
Because it's not here
No,
yet.
no, that's not my question
Oh, okay,
at all.
okay. I'm just, I can't.
I would just
I
like
think
to see our,
you
I would
have-
like to see
you
our
connected the
five-year
budget with
plan.
it
I would like to see
somehow.
our five-year plan, give me more specific information about the community values.
I think you'll see that
Oh,
once
okay.
it's released and ratified to the board, and the board has a chance to view it
Right.
and to make suggestions on changes or to fully adopt it as is.
Right,
That'll be coming here in the next month.
yeah.
We're not there yet. We still got another meeting here next week to go over a lot of the key performance indicators, so we still have lots of work to do. So, more to come.
I hate to
Jennifer?
add
It's
any
coming.
more to this discussion, but was this in the board book, this presentation?
No, that'll be added tomorrow.
Okay, and there might have been some other things. I'm sure you're following up on that. I just didn't remember seeing that. Thank you.
I appreciate the dialogue, everybody. It's very, very good and very helpful. Unless there's any other items? Okay, I think we're good. I'm gonna adjourn the meeting for tonight, and we'll see everybody May 2nd at 6, not 7. Right back here, right back here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Appreciate it.